Hello, welcome everyone here. My name is László Szabó, I am director of REC, and let me welcome the presenters and let me welcome the audience as well on this workshop, which is organized by REC together with the British Embassy. And our topic is a very hot topic, because we would like to cover the flexibility, energy storage, and demand-side response related issues. And it's not an accident that we chose this topic together with the Embassy. Because after few negotiations and following the European energy policy developments and the Hungarian energy policy development, we have decided that this will be the second topic in the row which we would like to cover now. If you consider, for example, the latest energy policy development in the European Union, like the new market design or the green energy package, but you can consider all of them, the Green Deal or the Repower EU policies, you see that all of them are pushing more and more on the gear to have more renewables in the power sector of the European countries. And when you are increasing these targets, at the same time, you have to ensure that these capacities can be integrated into the system in a flexible manner. That's why it's not only renewables which we need in the system, but we need those flexible capacities and flexible solutions that can solve this issue. So at the same time, to have higher renewable, we can ensure security of supply related dimension as well. So we can provide a real solution to this issue. That's why we decided for this topic, and I'm really happy that we have really great presenters here with us, and we have a very packed day which we are looking for this morning actually. Roughly we would separate the topics into three main subjects. First, we have some keynotes on the flexibility strategies, who the countries, who Europe sees these strategies and how it will be developed in the future. We are very happy that we can learn from the UK experience here as well. And then we have two panel discussions. One of them will focus on the storage solution, a very interesting panel. We are really looking forward for that one. And then in the second panel, we'll mainly concentrate on the demand side, flexibility related issues. So it's really a dense day. I hope that everyone who joined us will find his way here, and you will learn a lot from these panel discussion as well. Just two or three technical issues which I would like to share with you. Please, if you are an attendee, you can still participate actively in the workshop. So please, if you have any question, just use the chat function. We are looking at the chat function and we follow these questions and we try to incorporate it into the discussion. So please be active and send your question to the keynote speakers or to the panel discussion as well. Few more issues. The workshop is recorded, which recording will be made available after the workshop. So later on you can have a look at it again. You can listen to it if you find interesting parts which you want to listen to. There will be a summary which will be published, and most of the presentation will be made available on the website as well. With this, I think I just want to thank actually the British Embassy for the opportunity to work together and have this workshop organized together, and with all your help in the networking activities as well. So thanks a lot for this. And with this, I would like to give the floor to the ambassador, to the British ambassador to Budapest, Paul Fox, to give the opening speech. So with this, I would like to give the floor to you, Paul, and let's start the workshop. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Victor, and welcome everyone this morning. I'd like to start by thanking the Regional Energy Research Centre and our UK and Hungarian speakers for making today's event possible. I'd also like to thank my team at the Embassy as well. Overall, I think today is a result of excellent cooperation between all the various players. I think a focus today is energy security, and this tops the agenda for many governments in the region, and is an essential component of energy transition. And the UK is no exception in regarding this as a priority. In February, the UK government created a new Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, and this is tasked with securing our long-term energy supply and bringing down energy bills for people and business. I think this is recognition of the pressure rising energy prices, a result of Putin's war in Ukraine, is having on the cost of living. It is a recognition of the need to secure more energy from domestic, nuclear and renewable sources. It also recognises the need to secure all opportunities on our path to net zero. We see four fundamental challenges: phasing out Russian energy imports while maintaining security of supply, moderating the impact of global price rises, increasing our energy independence, and maintaining our commitment to our 2050 net zero target, including the phasing out of coal. In short, the UK will speed up our energy transition to increase our energy security and independence. But there are other challenges as well, challenges we all face. I think we all need a huge legal and regulatory effort to create the best environment for reform and delivery. We need to address supply chain and logistical challenges to speed up project delivery. We need to improve our energy efficiency to reduce emissions and to respond to the cost of living crisis. And we need to invest in research and development to produce, for example, innovative energy storage technologies. You'll hear all about this and more today. It is a hugely complex undertaking, but it is necessary and it will be worth it. I hope you will find the discussion interesting and useful, but above all, I hope it will spur further cooperation between our two countries in this vitally important area. So thank you very much for listening.
Dear Ambassador, thank you very much. With this, we give the floor to Pál Ságvári, Vice President and the Hungarian energy regulator, because Pál will undertake the role of leading the next keynote session. So Pál, the floor is yours. And thank you very much really for the introductory remark as well.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. On behalf of MEC, the Hungarian regulator. So first of all, thanks for the organizer REC for this very timely topic, and also my thank goes to British Ambassador and Your Excellency for contributing and making this workshop inclusive with distinguished UK experts. The first panel's topic is about the flexibility in general. So that's the kind of setting the scene for the two other panels. Before I dive into it and introduce you the speakers, I have just a couple of slides to setting the tone and a little bit to include our UK experts and explain where we are and what is the topic du jour for Hungary and for the policy and also for the regulatory issues regarding this topic, this broad topic. So this is to explain a little bit where we are and also to highlight some of our dilemmas that we have. Next slide, please. So the big picture policy overview for Hungary is that we have in the last 5 years super ambitious renewables. It's a PV program, and also in terms of EU member states, an ambitious penetration for the PVs, which resulted in a scarcity of flexibility in the Hungarian balancing market. So we see the first symptom is that you can see on the slide that the balancing costs are skyrocketing in the last 5 years in all the most important market parts, or AFRR and also in the MFRR areas. The second is that there are long queues for the PVs, and there is currently no connection available for the grid scale and also for the household scale for the PVs for access to the grid. The third is that we have very high prices in evening hours, and that goes with the fourth point. So the import is important in the evening hours, and that's the most important flexibility or the characteristic of Hungary, that we have more interconnection capacity than peak. So that's very actively used by the market players to somehow mitigate the balancing issues. But of course, as you can see on the balancing prices, this is clearly not enough. If we compare the costs to our neighboring countries, we see it's 3 times, 4 times higher than our neighbors. Next slide, please. So in order to change a little bit the situation, there is a new battery support scheme which is being prepared and about to launch by the Energy Ministry. I don't want to go into the details, just the structure of this battery support scheme it has 2 elements. The first is a fixed element, is a capex type of a subsidy based on the European post-COVID fund, the RRF, and the second is a contract for different, the OPEX type of subsidy, which aims to provide a firm revenue floor to ensure the bankability of the storage projects. So those 2 elements are put together in order to launch a program and at the same time incentivizing the future assets that they still need to optimize against all available market. So why is that? Because the batteries contracted 1 day in advance, so not locking in long-term revenue streams, which might potentially hinder the bankability of these projects. In Hungary, we have no capacity market or long-term TSO special products, which would be available for storages. And we know that batteries, of course, it's not a jack of all trade, but it has positive externalities for the system, which is somehow difficult to monetize. And storages can help in balancing, load leveling, sometimes peak shaving, and in general to make the grid more flexible. Next slide, please. So max task. So our task as the regulator. So we are responsible for setting the benchmark revenue. So this is the OPEX subsidy element of the scheme for the contract for difference evaluation. Here the biggest dilemma, the question is how to track, reflect the changes in the market in order to ensure there is an optimal revenue stack for a 10 years horizon for these projects, because we see that these assets might have two revenue streams as the start, but in the 10 years horizon, they can have much more revenue streams. So, for example, there is no DSO flexibility platform in Hungary yet, and as we go into the 10 years horizon, it is possible that they also hedge against the intraday or even the day ahead markets. So the dilemma is to launch the program and not to over subsidize them. And the second is there should be differentiate between asset classes, so it should be technology neutral or it should be technology inclusive. So and creating different stacks for in technology, sizing, and in energy capacity. The third is that they should get priority grid access or not. I mean, it's of course it's important, but the question is whether that on what term or what level, what kind of priority should be given to this kind of assets. And the fourth one is that should players with existing grid capacity or grid access have the priority. So we think that the hybrid power plants, it could be useful for them to facilitate their scheduling and also not to lose energy when the TSO is asking them not to produce. The second is the gas-fired power plants, so to reduce their must run and save gas consumption, and also to helping their ramping ability. Or the third is the consumers to support their energy optimization. So we will have a public consultation on these questions soon. It will be launched in the following weeks. So this is where we are, and this is just to orientate our UK experts. And if we can go to the next slides related to that, but with a little bit bigger context. So we have some other dilemmas that we are facing from regulatory point of view, and this can fuel the discussion of the panels later. So first is, should the TSO offer special storage product or not? Primary reserves at the FCR in Hungary, it is saturated, and that's the most natural market for the storages. But of course, the other strong point of a storage that in terms of ramping, they can do better than the standard AFRR product. So that's a question whether it should be a specialized product for them. The second is that is related to removing entry barriers for small units. Currently, the general rule of the bid size by the TSO is 5 megawatts in most of the time, but in some tenders it's 1 megawatt. So the question goes like was it a problem, or do you see any confusion when going down with the bid size? And does it cause a problem for the grid companies or to aggregators to manage them and to make the settlement? The third is that the requested delivery duration as an entry barrier. Is it an entry barrier or not? So currently the regulatory system is more tailor-made for the existing gas-fired power plant fleet, which is the most more than 95% of the local flexibility. We have very few storages now, like dozens of megawatt hours. So that's why the regulation is like today. So the question is like it's also that if there are products which have smaller delivery duration, like 8 hours typically, does it have any issue in the system or not? Barriers for revenue stacking. Yes, currently there are no DSO markets available for the flexibility, local flexibility providers. Of course, the EU regulation, the clean energy package, has been transposed, and the secondary legislation is there. But some DSOs are preparing for that. Some DSOs currently are not that much enthusiastic. So the question is how was it motivated the DSOs, or what is the evolution for such a markets to come online. And the last point is that the grid should somehow drive the location of the storages. What is the best way to communicate forward-looking information of the network congestions? And this question is more about the transparency. So those were the other dilemmas in a bigger picture. With that, let me finish this part, and let me ask the presenters to speak instead of me. So first, let me ask Viktor Ratz from REC to have your presentation. So, as with a very brief introduction, Viktor is with REC since 2018. He's a seasoned expert in energy economics with a special focus for the storages and how to put them into the how to integrate to the power grids. And he's holding 2 degrees, one from University of Southern Denmark and one from Budapest Corvinus University. So Viktor will speak about the global big picture of the storage solution. Viktor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you for the opportunity for me to speak and give a brief introduction about the role of energy storages in the energy transition. First, I would like to start with presenting how the storage capacity installation has changed in the past, and what can we see or predict for the future. So on the left hand side, we can see the uptake of energy storage installation globally from the mid of last century. And here we can see that mainly pump hydro storage systems became widespread, and especially at the beginning of this period. And this is due to the fact that storage has been used as a load following or peak load generator besides nuclear power plants, and so they were balancing the demand and supply side during this period. However, since the 70s, the gas-firing power plants became more widespread on peak load generator side, due to the fact that they were more competitive, price competitive, and also there was no special environmental need to place these generators. If we look at the graph, and they really appear at the top of the graph, the energy solutions throughout the last 1 or 2 decades. These new technologies appeared as variable renewable energy sources entered the markets on a larger scale, and they were used also mostly for balancing purposes. If we look at how the energy, the utility scale battery storage capacity has increased in the last 6-7 years globally, we can see that mainly in China and US they became more widespread, but also Europe is catching up. And as we can see from the staff working paper based on based on the data from International Energy Agency, we can expect an exponential growth in installed utility scale battery capacities in the future until 2030. If we look at, although Paul already mentioned that we have a few megawatt hours of capacities, batteries capacities in Hungary, it's actually 27 megawatt power capacity and around 37 megawatt hour storage capacities. They are all battery lithium-ion storages licensed since 2018, so the last couple of years, and located in 7 sites, and they are mainly used for frequency regulation. So if we compare this scale to what we can see in the UK, that they have around 1.72 gigawatt storage capacity, we can state that there is a way to go for Hungary to integrate more storage. There is a fresh new document from the European Commission. It's a recommendation on energy storage underpinning decarbonised and secure EU energy system. It was published Tuesday, and it contains 10 recommendations. And instead of going through one by one, I would like to summarize them and to state that these recommendations really go to increase or identify market and regulation developments, as we can see, for example, in point 1 on preventing double taxation, or considering potential financing gaps and providing financing instruments. But also this document faces the fact that flexibility needs should be also highlighted on a larger scale by stating that these needs should be integrated into the updates of the NECPs, which work is just in process. But also they recommend to assess flexibility needs of and in order to use storage to substitute transmission and further transmission and distribution network capacity enlargement. If we look at the recommendations, we can also see that the European Commission is not only focusing on one services and one technologies, but several others. So we can see that that behind the meter storages, as well as storages working on island and remote areas, appear besides the transmission distribution network development services. And also, I would like to highlight that the Commission is also keen on transparency and on R&D. So they find it also very key to make data available for future investors on market, on network congestions and renewable energy curtailment, so they can make better decisions based on these data available. And finally, I would like to introduce to you a recommendation or an estimation by the European Association for Storage of Energy. This document has been used as a basis for the previously shown recommendation by the European Commission, and calculates the energy storage needs for 2030 and 50. And what we can see is that they were also relying on previous analysis, and they emphasizes the importance of power to X to power, so bidirectional storages, which means that these storages do not appear on the final and use consumption side, but they allow to be used for frequency regulation as well as long-term arbitrage and load shift. So we can see that in 2030 around 187 gigawatt power capacity need is estimated, mainly based on battery capacity around 67 gigawatt, but also on long-term, long-duration storages such as pumped hydro, considering new and existing storages. But also, as I mentioned, this power to X to power bidirectional storages are needed, and especially in the longer term, in order to substitute or replace a portion of gas turbine flexibility by 2030. I think it's a very ambitious goal. In 2050, we can see that the needed storage capacity increases up to 600 gigawatt, and this is due to the fact that long-duration storage capacities are needed, as well as the other power to X power technologies. But also the power to X one directional storages such as vehicle to grid, thermal storage, or electrolyzers are necessary for sector coupling purposes as well. So with this, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you, thank you, Victor. I found the turn on button. Let me check whether do we have questions from the participants. I encourage you to ask questions in the chat, but I don't see any. So I have some questions for you, Victor. So you said that probably around 100.
I'm sorry, but I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes, right now. Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry. So thank you for this global overview, and I'm just digesting the figures that you just shown here. So you say that it's 160 gigawatt which is installed today and globally, and some 5-6 gigawatt new additions are there each year. If we are trying to understand the position of the EU, how can you do that in terms of today, 2030 or 2050. If I understand well, the EU has the target, the 187 gigawatt is the EU goal by 2030, and 600 gigawatt by 2050. So can you just have better understand the EU's place globally, and within the EU, which countries are the leading ones to have storages? Thank you.
Yes, yes, thank you for the question. So, as we could see from the battery uptake on global scale, Europe is on the third place after US and China. And we could also see that the International Energy Agency predicts to annually grow the battery storage capacity and to increase this capacity exponentially by 2030. And if we compare these the figures from the ESC paper which states that around 67 gigawatt battery storage capacity is required, and in globally around 680 gigawatt batteries capacity installation is expected by 2030, then we can see that it's only 1/10 of the global scale. And if we also think about sorry, if we yeah, and which country? That was the other question. I'm sorry. So it's the International Energy Agency also looks at which country should or will take the largest scale of battery storage installation. And on first place we can see the UK, but also Germany. Based on this estimation, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain will also overtake.
Okay, thank you. I have other question. For that, can we ask back the slide, your last slide, where there was the stack of the flexibilities, and then my question goes to the long-term flexibility tool, because here we are talking about storages, which is of course is 4 hours, but when we are talking about the 2050 decarbonized goals, yes, thank you. If I see here on blue, there's those are the electrolyzers, which are the long-term seasonal flexibility, I would say, and that's if I just look at it, it's like 20%. If I see by 2050, it's also the same ratio, like 20%. So that my question is that what do you think, or how you see that? Is it enough, or I mean, it's just a comment from my side that it was. I was expecting more. I was expecting more to somehow have the seasonal flexibility if we want to take out the gas storage as the main flexibility tool for the seasonal ones. If you have any ideas or comment on that, it's just a remark from my side.
Yes, yes. Thank you for the question. So actually, the study shows that out of this 600 gigawatt capacity, around 200 gigawatt capacity goes to the long duration storage systems, and the other 400 gigawatts can be considered as a long-term storage, which can be also used for frequency regulation as well. And so with the help of bidirectional storages, it can also support the flexibility, further flexibility issues that will arise with high variable renewable energy integration. This is what we can see from these data right now.
Okay, thank you, Victor. I don't see questions from the chat, so thank you for your presentation. And let me turn now to our second speaker, Matt Aldridge, from the UK government, from the newly established Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, as it was also presented by the ambassador. So, Matt, the floor is yours. You understand our questions and where we are more or less. So we are all ears.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And just to put everyone at ease, a newly established department, it may be, but it's very much the same people working in the same areas as it was before. So it's more the sense that we can get from the decision made by our government was to put more emphasis on energy security and on net zero. It's always been a central aim of our government. We were the first major economy to have a net zero goal. So I think with the changing environment around us, the fact that we've now taken all the energy bits and put them into one place as a department is a real sign of progress and focus in this area. If I could go to the next slide, please. So I should introduce myself. I'm Matt Aldridge. I'm head of UK electricity storage policy. It's interesting to note what I don't do as well as what I do. And in electricity storage, it means I don't lead on hydrogen storage, although I do work very closely with the team there. I don't need to labour on this slide. I've been quite impressed with the slide so far. Everyone has an understanding of what this is. We're moving from one type of electricity system to another. Can we go to the next slide, please? Excuse me. But what you may not be as aware of is the deep and quite ambitious goals that we have within the UK energy system. 50 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 is a huge ambition, and something that's going to really change the way the electricity system works. More intermittent renewables sat offshore is going to have a real effect on the way that we balance our system, and it's going to require much more flexibility going forward into the future. We want a net zero electricity system by 2035. Again, this is an absolutely huge ambition. Excuse me. And we have a long way to go, but we're making fantastic progress in getting there. So in order to have this net zero system by 2035 with 50 gigawatts of offshore wind, we are going to need to be a smart and flexible system, but in such a way, excuse me, I'm going to take some water. But do it in such a way that we can have low carbon flexibility going forward as well. So demand side response is going to play a huge role in this, but so is electricity storage. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about. Can we get to the next slide, please? So the way we conceptualize it in the UK is we have short duration storage, long duration storage, and then we have interseasonal storage. The interseasonal storage we foresee will be provided by technologies like hydrogen. This is for the really long periods of low renewable generation. This will be, hydrogen will do this. So those winter days where there's very little light and no wind, and we're looking for days of duration on end. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have our short duration capacity, and this is deploying across the UK at a pace at the moment. We have a couple of gigawatts in the pipeline coming forward. The way that these are all lithium-ion batteries, and the way that these are being deployed is to play within the ancillary markets and the balancing mechanism in order to provide what the system needs in order for it to stay balanced. And then we have this chunk in the middle, the long duration storage. And we're not seeing so much of that being built at the minute. And we have the pumped hydro storage that we've already discussed today, which was built in the 70s. Some of it's quite old, which is testament to how great quality these systems are and how they have great longevity. But we need more. And we also need more long duration storage of other technologies as well, because pumped hydro storage, as much as it's fantastic, is quite geographically based. And in the UK, this means that we'll be looking mostly at sites in Scotland and mostly at sites in Wales. And the way our grid is arranged, sites in Scotland could potentially place extra constraints on the system if not operated in the way that is desirable. And we certainly need more storage in the heavy demand areas such as the southeast of England, where London is, where there's quite a lot of demand. We're going to need storage down there too, but there's no mountains or large hills, so we're going to struggle to put in traditional pumped hydro storage. So we want to bring forward novel technologies such as compressed air and liquid air to provide this larger scale, longer duration segment of the market. So short duration operating fine at the minute, coming out quite, deploying quite well on a merchant basis across the UK, all sorts of flexibility services. Interseasonal, like I said, hydrogen is the most likely player here. This is being developed on a large scale in the UK, as hydrogen is going to play an increasingly important part in our energy system going forward. But the hydrogen network is going to take some time to construct. So we have, like I said, we have this chunk here where we need longer duration storage, 8 hours plus is the sort of number we're looking at, which is mostly the traditional pumped hydro facilities, as well as the novel technologies that we want to bring forward. We also think hydrogen will be part of this market, but as I said, it still has some way to go. Can I have the next slide, please? Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Excellent. So we've been thinking a long time about this in the UK. Like I said, we had our net zero target back in 2018. So we've been trying to build our way around to reach our net zero goals. And back in 2001, we had the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan. This was the second such plan, which gives a list of action points between government, our regulator, and of course industry as well, in order to bring forward a much smarter and more flexible electricity system. As part of this, we also brought forward a call for evidence to try and understand why we're not seeing large-scale, long-duration electricity storage being built, even though we know there's a need for it. We've also got our net zero strategy and our British Energy Security Strategy, two key documents which put in context a smart and flexible electricity system going forward. And the next slide, please. So when we released the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan back in 2001, we did some analysis. Now, just before we go into this analysis, I think it's really important we talk about the fact that this doesn't have the increased ambition of a net zero electricity system by 2035. So this was before doing that. This is just reaching our net zero goals by 2050. And we know that our goals are much more ambitious now than they were when we did this analysis. But this analysis showed us that we needed at least 30 gigawatts of flexibility on the energy system by 2030. And by flexible, we mean that is a combination of storage as well as demand side response and interconnection, connecting ourselves to our European partners and being able to share electricity when we need it most. All this means is we need to build more and we need to be much more flexible going forward. Can the next slide, please? So the flexibility plan, like it says there, we had the analysis. It focuses on 4 key pillars of achieving a more flexible electricity system, facilitating flexibility from consumers. So this is DSR, making sure that our electric vehicle network is smart so that we can draw down on electric vehicle energy when it's required. That we have flexibility on the grid, so this is grid scale, so this is the batteries and the electricity storage that we've just been talking about, and that's key, and that's where I'm focused, but also includes interconnection. We want to make sure that the markets reward flexibility, and this is absolutely key, because if we don't have markets that reward flexibility in the right way, we will end up building the wrong things in the wrong part of the system. And even if we do build things like electricity storage, we can't always guarantee, unless we reward flexibility enough, that people will be flexing their assets in the way that we require, rather than the way that makes their revenue stacks add up. So aligning those two things is crucially important to us, and making sure that markets reward flexibility is essential. And then finally, as we all appreciate, digitalizing the system, because this requires second by second up-to-date information, asset registration and understanding across the entire network. And without that, we are still rather analog in the way our electricity system works. Without digitalizing it, we won't get that nimble balancing that we require to get maximum gains. And all this is supported by the money that we're putting towards innovation. That's not just in storage, but all sorts of types of innovation across the flexibility space. We need to drive forward skills and to be able to manage these systems, build these systems, design these systems, and supply chains is also a key part of that, I feel, and monitoring, and that's us understanding how the system is developing going forwards. Can the next slide, please? So this is our ambition as a statement, and how we're going to focus on bringing it forward. It comes down to the fact that we want the best regulatory framework, a best in class going forward for storage in the world. And what we mean by that is we are really trying to design a system where the market decides what is required and when it's required. And we just have a space in which industry can bring forward what they think is best and how it suits, and we believe that this is the best way to design a system going forwards. However, as we'll discuss in a moment, there are a few gaps where the markets aren't rewarding the value to the system, and we need to work on those. Have the next slide, please. And we're very much focused in this conversation on the large scale grid electricity storage, but I also cover some of the domestic storage issues as well. So just so you can see what we've been working on so far, issues in the UK, we work on planning guidance. We want to make the planning system more receptive to local concerns, but also allow it to be more permissible for storage projects to be built where they're required. There's a regulatory issue in the UK around the definition of storage, which is quite interesting. And we've been working on that, and that is going through Parliament currently. And we've also rearranged our business rates to reward people, businesses, for the storage that they deploy going forwards. As you do in the UK, we still have frictions around connections going forward. Connecting as much as we want all the time to the system is expensive and time consuming, and there is a serious problem with the way that sorry, not a serious problem, but there is a concern that we're not prioritizing in the right order what gets connected, and this is a constant frustration I receive from industry. If you go across to the next column in domestic, although I think this applies as much to grid scale services as well, health and safety and asset registration. This is key going forwards. We are in danger when it comes to lithium-ion batteries of building lots of electricity storage, which is going to be great for balancing our electricity system. But at the same time, if we don't do it in a way which carries with us local consent of the people nearby, then we won't be able to reach our net zero goals, because they will prevent us from building storage where it needs to be stored. And that means we need to get the health and safety right, which is absolutely crucial. And asset registration, this is very important, not just for the health and safety concerns, but also just for the distribution network operators understanding how they can flex assets across our system. And then if we go into the final column, large scale, long duration storage, and this, if we go to the next slide, I'll talk about large scale, long duration storage in more detail. Thank you very much. So when we released our call for evidence a couple of years ago, we went out to industry and we asked why we're not seeing more large scale, long duration electricity storage being built. And what came back was quite clear, that the large capex costs for building these technologies, the slow payback rates, the long build times, all create an environment where, if you are a large scale investor, you can actually make your money back very quicker if you invest in the short duration market. We've understood this, you've understood this, because you've discussed market mechanisms that you wish to support these things being built, these assets being built going forward. And we are currently in a position where we're examining the same thing. We committed in the British Energy Security Strategy last year that we would create an environment where we would de-risk investment enough that we would bring forward large scale, long duration electricity storage, enough of it to balance the system. And currently we are examining all the different policy options, including some of the options that you're looking at, such as a contract for difference with capex support. That's what you're looking at. We're looking at all sorts of different ways of doing it that include regulated asset bases, loans. We're looking at caps and floors, and we're also looking at whether we can adjust our capacity market in order to better facilitate the development of these assets going forward. So that's what we're doing currently, and we hope to go out to consultation sometime over the next year or so. If you go to the next slide, I think. Yeah, so I hope that's a really informative introduction to the way that we approach the electricity storage market in the UK. In summary, we want it to be merchant, and we want it to pay for itself and establish itself going forwards. And I think we think it's very important that that creates the best market market design, electricity system design in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, for the great presentation. Before I ask you a question, I'm just telling the audience it was my bad. I didn't find the questions in the chat. Now I have it. So again, I encourage everybody to ask question from Matt as well. What I see now is these are questions to Victor, which I don't want to disrupt now this part, so I will come back at the end. But just two general questions came, that whether the presentations are available or not. I think it's organizer REC who is asking the consent of the presentators. My presentation is of course available, so it's up to everybody's consent. So Matt, thanks again. It is really interesting and seeing the ambitions that you are having. By if I understand well, that by 2030 30 gigawatt that you are aiming, and by 2050 is double, so that's 60. And it was interesting to see that the most of it is really the interconnections, and the lesser part is the local flexibility. And if I understand, if I can ask about this best-in-class regulatory framework that you just talked about, the by mid 2020, this sounds really ambitious and great. And you had just a half sentence that the market is not delivering everywhere. So there are gaps. Can you explain us a little bit, knowing that our systems are light years from each other, but to better understand that at your stage, what you see now are the gaps where the market are potentially not delivering that much.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I believe Nina's going to come on and talk about demand side response in a moment when it comes to flexibility. But I think we are building towards a market which will be much more flexible for consumers, and I don't think we fully understand the potential that is there with consumers at the moment. And I think when it comes to the designing of the markets, there are people who are relatively concerned that we won't be able to bring forward the amount of demand side response that we require going forward. I don't think that's the case. What I do think is we need to better design our markets and understand and then see how it develops there. So I think there's a gap in the market there. I think, like I said, with the long duration storage, there's definitely an issue when it comes to the market because of the high capex to enter the market. When it comes to the revenue stack going forward, the lack of guaranteed returns going forward is putting pressure on investors at the moment, and we really want to seek to enable investment in the market and de-risk that for investors, and then we'll see things developed. So I think that we have a program at the minute in the UK called we call it REMA, which is the review of electricity market arrangements currently. So we're reviewing the whole view of electricity market arrangements, and we really want to see from that flexibility is better rewarded going forwards, because we seem to be very generation and demand driven at the minute without a clear understanding of the true value of flexibility, which is quite frankly billions going forward. So we need to see that in the market.
Okay, just checking the questions box and looking at and waiting for some questions. So I have another question, two more questions actually. One is for the flexibility, but first you mentioned the long duration flexibility. Here I have a frank question. Is that we understand that pump hydro storages are their established technology, but there are some problems with that. The geography is not always there, and also from an environmental point of view that might be problematic. Then hydrogen is for quite a huge future. It's a little bit experimental. So how you say, okay, you want to de-risk or expecting some innovations at this field, but what do you see like technologies which are on the horizon that might play a role, and how you try to bring them in, and in what time horizon, and what is your regulatory approach to that?
Yeah, no, and that's a really valid point. I mean, there are loads of technologies out there currently which can provide this long duration electricity storage. There's some flow batteries out there which are looking very interesting coming forward. There's some different types of pumped hydro which allow you to have the same thing, basically the same gravitational energy, except you don't need as big a slope to do it, which is quite interesting. There is gravitational energy out there, and of course much more advanced, but not at scale yet. Compressed air and liquid air are all options that we are or have been supporting. We've got a very good track record in the UK of innovation programs out there. So we've been supporting all sorts of different schemes across the UK, which are coming forward at the moment through what we call the Storage at Scale program, and this has been followed by the longer duration electricity energy storage program, where we're funding companies to bring forward their technologies and develop this first of a kind stuff going forward. So from a regulatory point of view, it's obviously very complex the way these things are regulated, but the way it works in the UK when it comes to regulation is industry comes first, and industry is responsible for the way that it installs, maintains, and employs its equipment. So working really closely with the innovators to ensure that the regulation is there in place, ready going forward, is really important, and working side by side. And with government supporting these schemes through innovation funding, we can anticipate any issues that are coming forwards, and we can adjust accordingly.
Okay, thank you, Matt. We are running out of time, so just the last question from the audience is regarding the connections to the grid. So what's the approach to the connections to the grid? Because for the whole system, this is great to have flexible assets, but it might be it needs some prioritization. So who comes first? So how you do that? What's your approach?
Yeah, no, totally, and I think it comes back to what we were saying really about rewarding flexibility in the market. It's great, but also if you don't reward flexibility for its value in the way that you prioritize grid connections, then we'll also suffer. Flexibility allows us to do things cheaper and greener, and therefore we want to see more of it sooner. There is a competition. The connections are a problem. They're a problem because they're expensive to do. There are limited people who can do it, and the resources around them are all very constrained themselves, and everyone wants to connect, and everyone wants to be connected yesterday. So there is a pressure, not just on our grid, but on all grids, to be able to get the attention of the network operators to be able to connect people. There is a review at the moment going into the way that connection priorities are decided in the UK, and that's been triggered by the fact that we've got so much electricity storage, short duration electricity storage coming onto the network, and we know that we need it, but also the queues for connections are years long, so we need to establish some way of reprioritizing that. So I think it's an issue for everyone, and I think a little bit of understanding that the people running these systems are under a lot of pressure to get it fixed.
Thank you, Matt. At this point, I think I should stop, and we couldn't answer all the questions, but if you allow us, then we would collect and send it to you after the event. So now let me turn to Nina Klein. Hello, Nina. So you are from Ofgem, the UK regulator, and before you worked in the Department of Energy as well, and you will have a presentation a little bit broader, so not the storage, but in the from a regulatory point of view regarding the flexibility. So the floor is yours, and to the audience, feel free to ask questions. Nina.
Great, yes, good morning. Thank you very much for having me. It's really nice to be able to come and see all the work you're doing and share some work from our side as well. So yeah, I'll be discussing how we can enable a future where we unlock the full value of distributed flexibility. And that's from the point of view of, yes, the UK energy regulator. So you'll see from my first slide here that the regulator works very closely with the Department of Energy. We have kind of this same view of the energy system transition that's happening. So I think it's key to say that there's two fundamental changes that we're already starting to see here in the UK. First of all, much more variable renewable energy like wind and solar. And at the second time, the electrification of heating technologies and transport technologies, so heat pumps and electric vehicles. And we forecast that there's going to be a doubling in demand for electricity by 2050. So the question is how we deal with that. And essentially, the old way of running the system was having supply and demand and adjusting your supply to meet your demand. But now we need to get to a system where we're adjusting our demand to meet our supply. And essentially, we're saying we need to transition to a flexibility-centric system. And so just to kind of put some numbers on it, as Matt was doing, but slightly more focused numbers here, thinking about the demand side, flexibility only, not talking about storage or interconnection. We're forecasting that in the UK by 2050, we'll need 30 gigawatts of flexibility coming purely from that demand side. And there's calculations that that could save us up to £5 billion per year up in 2050. And those savings crucially come from not overbuilding the amount of generation we need, so not having to build more solar farms or more wind farms, because we're being smart with our demand. And it's also about reducing or deferring the need for us to reinforce our network and lay more cables. So again, that keeps costs down. So I guess the clear narrative here is that we need to unlock flexibility because there are such huge benefits that it can bring from doing so. And we're particularly interested in unlocking flexibility from smaller scale assets. We've had quite good success in the UK with industrial and commercial large size flexibility, but focusing on those small assets like the huge number of electric vehicles we're seeing people going out and buying, and the targets that the government has for installing heat pumps. And so with these electric vehicles and with these electric heat pumps, potentially they can be a parasitic load on the system, causing increased demand and peak demand being very high. Or they can be symbiotic and they can support the system by providing flexibility. And so these assets can be really useful tools for the electricity system, helping with energy balancing of supply and demand, helping with managing constraints on the network, and also helping with network operability services. So when they provide these services and support the system, it's not only beneficial to the individual consumers who own the electric vehicles and the heat pumps, so they'll be rewarded financially for providing that flexibility to the system, but also because of that £5 billion number, all consumers benefit because the cost of our whole system is lower. And so every single consumer's electricity bill will be lower, even if they don't happen to own an EV. So I'll now set out the flexibility journey that we've been on in the UK, and it's kind of a period of divergence, convergence, and divergence. So I'll just talk that through. So back in 2015, we first became interested in this concept of flexibility. And so the government launched a call for input. And so then a period of kind of divergent discovery followed. We talked to lots of people, gathered lots of information, and tried to understand what flexibility could be and what it could offer. So during that policy discovery period, we gathered all of these inputs, and then we entered a policy refinement period where we refined those inputs into a policy position and tried to converge on an approach to how we were going to now make the most of flexibility. And so in 2017, we published the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, which is this plan Matt spoke about in his presentation. And very specifically, it had 29 actions for government, Ofgem and industry to undertake together to unlock this smart, flexible energy system that we saw the benefits of. So having published that plan in 2017, that launched a kind of second divergent phase of development and discovery out in industry. So it created a wealth of new initiatives, lots of new projects, and we've gained a huge amount of knowledge there. So I just thought I'd kind of run through some of the key achievements that we've achieved now off the back of that plan. So at a strategic level, as Matt said, we've now published a second Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, and it's a refreshed plan with an updated set of actions to make sure that we continue to push progress and really achieve what we want to. We've also published an energy data task force and an energy digitalization task force strategy, and they produce specific recommendations about unlocking the value of data and digitalization, because as Matt said, it's going to be key to have digitally enabled technologies to have this smart, flexible energy system that we're operating. And particularly, they included recommendations around energy system data being presumed open, and that is now a licensing and legal requirement in the UK. So we've taken that recommendation on as the regulator. And I'll also point to work by the Electricity Networks Association. They've been running the Open Networks project, and this is an initiative where all nine grid operators in the UK are working together to align their processes for flexibility procurement. And if you have a look at the link on the slide, there's lots and lots of documentation of all the kinds of flexibility services and procurement processes and how to coordinate between transmission and distribution. So a really interesting wealth of resources there. Specifically then looking at some regulatory changes we brought in for both the networks and the assets themselves, just to give a few interesting examples. What we've done in the UK is we've undertaken legal separation of the transmission owner who owns the cables and the system operator who controls the flow of electricity through those cables. And we did that to ensure that flexibility was competing on a level playing field with laying cables. So the system operator is independent. They can look to either the cable layer or they can look to flexibility service providers, and they can pick the most economically optimal approach to manage the system. We've also got a license condition on the distribution network called C31E, which obliges the distribution network operators to procure flexibility whenever it's economically efficient, and also that they have to publish future statements and historic reports on their procurement so people can see where they're going to need flexibility going forward and know how much they've procured in the past. And we've also implemented EV smart charging regulations. So this makes it law in the UK that all private electric vehicle charge points have to be smart and they have to be able to provide flexibility services. And that's going to make a huge difference in ensuring that they can contribute to that smart, flexible energy system as we see people buying more and more electric vehicles every day. We've also developed some industry-led standards to help at that industry rollout. We've published energy smart appliance standards. These are technical standards to make sure we can have flexibility interoperably from multiple different consumer assets and different providers. That ensures a competitive flexibility landscape and helps bring forward these technologies in a consistent way. We've also got the FlexAssure Code of Conduct. This is a common standard for aggregators, flexibility service providers, to provide assurances to their customers that they're getting a good deal and being treated fairly. So that's important to help build confidence in the industry. And as Matt touched on, we've also got multiple innovation programs happening across Ofgem, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, and also some of our research innovation funding services. So we've invested hundreds of millions of pounds developing the innovative solutions from a technology perspective that we're going to need to unlock that flexible energy system. And so please do have a look at the links for kind of key innovation projects happening in this area, particularly the Net Zero Innovation Portfolio, which is funding a lot of flexibility research, and also the Prospering from the Energy Revolution was a suite of projects that just finished this year. So the learnings are really up to date and I really recommend having a look there. So I guess that position we're in now is that we've got all of this experience and lots of advances in very specific areas. So we've got initial flexibility markets being tendered at that DSO level. And we've also got lots of these innovation projects testing how these distributed energy resources can provide that flexibility. But now it's kind of a key time to bring all of that work together again and make sure it goes further. So the question really is, how can we make sure the whole is greater than the sum of its parts going forward? We really need energy markets that are as smart as these energy assets. And so the question is how we can do that. And so, yes, we think we're at an inflection point. And the question is where we should go now to get that convergence of all that disparate work into a cohesive end state. We want to be building consensus and integrating across different technologies and across different actors who are operating in this space. We think there's a need for some kind of joining up infrastructure, some digital infrastructure that can work across multiple markets, not to shape the markets directly, that's the REMA reform work, which Matt was talking about, but to enable them and make sure that they're open and transparent so these flexible technologies can participate. So we believe that we need an end vision for distributed flexibility, and we believe that can be a common digital energy infrastructure. And we think that would provide 3 core functions. First of all, information transparency. Second of all, coordinating market access and operations. And third of all, providing trusted governance services. And we think those 3 functions are really key to address a lot of the market failures we're seeing today that make it hard for these technologies to scale and participate in markets. So the question is what that future common energy digital infrastructure could look like. And just to add a little more detail, I'll talk through some options that we're thinking about. We've recently published them in a call for input to seek feedback from industry. And a call for input is kind of a pre-consultation, and I'll let you know how you can respond to at the end of the presentation. So in the call for input, we proposed 4 archetypes, just as examples, and essentially they sit on a spectrum from 1 to 4, where at number 1, well, from 1 to 4, as you go across that spectrum, you can get more and more functionality provided by the platform, but it becomes an increasing effort and more expensive to build. And so the question for industry is, at what point on the spectrum are we delivering the key functionality you need while not delivering more and paying too much and it taking too long? So we're really interested in what the views here are. So the first archetype is a business as usual archetype. This is basically a counterfactual, saying what would happen if we didn't do anything and we let current activities evolve naturally. And we think this would produce multiple markets with a lot of bilateral communication and fairly limited transparency and coordination. The next archetype, number 2, is a thin archetype, and it proposes having a common directory, which is basically a list where participants can see a list of all of the markets and all of the assets available, but they'd still have to do a lot of bilateral communication, again, with limited transparency and coordination. The analogy of this second archetype is essentially providing a map showing where the buyers and sellers are. So it's at least easier to know where they are, but you still have to walk around all of them. Archetype 3 is the medium archetype, and this proposes having a common exchange which hosts multiple markets. It can provide data transparently and it can coordinate across the markets, but the markets can undertake certain bespoke activities themselves. And so the analogy here is, rather than just the map, there's a common marketplace that everyone goes to at the same time, so you can transparently trade in a coordinated way and see the options available. The final archetype is number 4, which is the thick one, and this proposes a central platform which manages all of the markets completely centrally, so nothing is done by individual markets, and it's fully optimized to achieve the best outcome across all markets. And I guess that would be an analogy of a marketplace where there's an overseer telling everyone exactly what they have to buy all of the time. No one's making decisions for themselves. So we think these are interesting examples to kind of spark debate and initial discussion, and we're really interested to see what industry think. And so we'd also be really interested to know what you think. Our call for input is open at the moment. It's called The Future of Distributed Flexibility, and you can find it at that first link. There's also a second consultation if you're interested about the role of the distribution system operator. And so, yeah, if If you have any kind of examples of existing digital infrastructure or you're interested to give your views, please do respond. We're collecting responses until the 10th of May. So yes, thank you very much for having me to present, and I look forward to kind of discussions and any questions you have.
Thank you, Nina, for the great presentation and the journey you explained of the last 8-ish years. I liked the procedure of how you are getting to the consensus building. So first the policy innovations or discoveries, and then there is a separate industry part, and then you are at the consensus building phase. So in Hungary's case, so we don't have these local markets yet. But it's very interesting the next step. So if you have these kind of markets, then what is the next step to that? And it's interesting how it evolves, and this experience for us would be very interesting. That how you get through, and what is the option that you are opting for. So on the questions, as we don't have a lot of time, I'm just picking up one or two from the audience. So can you share details of calculating the flexible demand necessary? And to that I would add on my side that not just the demand but also the supply. So how you monitor it, or how you make it transparent? Whose task is that? Who's following that? So is it the regulator, the ministry? So how it comes out the X gigawatt that you are shooting for now, and also for the so this would be the first question.
And it's actually a really excellent first question, because we've been asking similar questions in the UK at the moment, and asking if there is a role maybe for a new institution that can do that independently and with a high degree of expertise across the whole energy sector, because we do have those local markets as well as the national markets. And a question of how can you have someone who calculates for all of that in an integrated way is really important. So I guess the way it sits at the moment is BEIS, as a government department, does modelling and forward calculations of how we think the deployment of transport and the transition, basically how the decarbonisation of transport, industry, domestic areas, industrial and commercial things, you know, we have a view of how the UK as a whole will transition to net zero, and therefore what that will mean for the energy system. And so based on those calculations, we can put targets of what we'd like to achieve. And there are also people in industry who do forecasting and modelling as well, very particularly our National Grid electricity system operator, the one that I spoke about being legally separated. They produce something called the future energy scenarios, which are really used a lot amongst industry and government. You can find them on the National Grid ESO website, the future energy scenarios, and they kind of forecast what will be the uptake of electric vehicles, what will be the uptake of hydrogen, how much energy are we using in industry, and they put forward these 4 different scenarios of what that could look like, because it's often a range, you know, it depends how much hydrogen there will be, whether we'll be using hydrogen for heating or electricity for heating. And so we have a range of scenarios that we look at, which lets us then kind of say what the range of flexible demand we might need or flexible supply we might need is. And I guess the question is, yes, going forward, we think there's maybe a role for government to work more closely with industry, and for industry at the national and local levels to work more closely together. And so that National Grid electricity system operator is being transitioned into a future system operator role, which means it can do that kind of strategic planning, working very closely with government, and also optimizing across both electricity and gas, because we're going to need more whole system, we call it, electricity and gas co-optimization. And also the second consultation I showed on my slide is the future of local energy institutions and governance. And again, it puts forward a role for a new actor called a regional system planner that can support in coordinating both that local level planning of what you'll need and the national level planning, so that all our plans at a local level add up to the same thing at the national level. So it's a really pertinent question, and we're creating new institutions to help fill that role in a whole system, both electricity and gas and local and national way.
Thank you, Nina. So I think we are running out of time, so it's really just the last question, because there will be a separate panel for that. Okay, we have calculated the need, and there comes the grid company, who is normally says that there is a flexibility and is happy to build the the grid. So focusing first on the hardware side. So what is the regulatory approach to check not that they should not do that always when there is a economic or a better solution, not to build the hardware, but some smarter solution is available. What would be the regulatory approach?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. The transmission level, every year they undertake something called the Network Options Assessment, and that's where they calculate what the cost would be for building the cables, and they compare it to the forecast costs of using flexibility in order to be able to make that decision. And so that's the National Grid Electricity System Operator that I spoke of, and that was why it was so important to have legal separation, so that the company making this assessment and doing the balancing isn't the same company that owns the cables. And so they have that independent process which can be verified. And at the local level, it's that license condition that I spoke about, license condition C31E. And that means that there is a regulatory incentive and requirement for the distribution network operator to make that same calculation of how much it would cost to build the cable and how much it would cost to build the flexibility, and then procure the most economically efficient option, again, to try and counter that bias of the fact that they are an institution that currently owns the cables and would get more money if they built more cables. We put that regulatory requirement on top to make sure that where it is economic, they are using flexibility. And then they have to do historic reporting on how much they used in those calculations. And so we as a regulator can monitor how much they are using that flexibility.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is clear that this was the main reason of the unbundling, which was done some years ago.
Possibly other reasons too, but definitely one of the key arguments. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Nina, Matt, Victor, thank you for the great discussion. So the time is up, and now there will be two other panels. I'm giving the floor to the next moderator, I guess, Victor. So thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Pa, for managing first keynote speaker part. So now we would like to turn to the first panel that is about the regulatory and market achievements and challenges of energy storage. In this panel, we invited two experts, one from the UK and one from Hungary, to discuss issues related to energy storages. So I would like to welcome first Ms. Charlotte Johnson and also Mr. Peter Horváth. So I would like to shortly introduce you to the audience. So Ms. Johnson is a Chief of Staff and Head of Markets at Flex, that is which company is a part of the Octopus Energy Group. Charlotte is passionate about accelerating the journey to net zero and regularly publishes engaging thought leadership material to a wide range of industry stakeholders. So thank you, Charlotte, for joining us today. And Mr. Peter Horváth, who is the CEO of the Dynamity Power Plant since July 2018, formerly Deputy CEO, and Peter is also the Business Development Manager of Met Power Hungary since 2014. Thank you, Peter, for joining us today. As an introductory question, I would like to kindly ask you to explain how you are involved in the energy storage theme. What kind of storage technologies do you operate, manage? First, Charlotte, if you could start, please. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I think just to give a little bit of flavor or background context to what we're doing at Kraken Flex, we're a software platform that's part of the Octopus Energy Group, and we provide basically the control capability, the optimization capability, and all the kind of real-time alerting and reporting on those assets. In terms of our role with storage, we manage around just over 40% of all of the battery energy storage in the UK that's on the system. This is predominantly lithium-ion assets, ranging from 1 hour in duration, but more recently we're starting to see assets that are also 2 hour in duration, which is quite exciting as the market kind of moves on. The majority of the assets on the platform are front of the meter, so anything I would say above sort of 5 megawatts. The largest site is 100 megawatts, but we do have about 27,000 electric vehicles that we're also optimizing, and 600 megawatts of renewables as well. So the platform is asset agnostic and also size agnostic. Victor, do you want me to go into a little bit about the market that they operate in, or shall I?
Yeah, maybe a bit later on. Thank you, Charlotte. Peter, if you could just shortly introduce your state in the energy storage thing. Thank you.
Okay, so Dunamenti Power Plant is, I think it's better to view it as a power station right now than a power plant. So it's a platform for flexible or dispatchable assets. Currently, predominantly gas-fired generation units, combined cycle and open cycle units. But as the market is transitioning or has been transitioning over the last decade, there have been a number of tough decisions we had to make to close down some of our older generation units and look forward to, you know, what would be our role, what would be the role of the site in 10 or 20 years from now. You know, we are seeing new technologies, or we have been seeing new technologies coming up. Basically, they all lack the carbon footprint or the commodity lag in providing flexibility to the power system. And a couple of years back, we have set up a separate business line from our conventional assets for new technologies, be digital or hardware, to enable us to provide flexibility to the power system without any commodity lag. So that starts with a recent pilot project in 2 hour duration battery electricity storage, a power to heat project which is currently ongoing, which is already 30 megawatts of scale, and also a smart aggregator platform, that's put it this way, something like an aggregator platform that can aggregate various types of technologies and assets and combine them into one virtual power plant, just the same way, I guess, any more developed aggregator group functions in the UK.
Yes, that would be a question like do you thank you, Peter, and that would be also my question, whether Charlotte, in your portfolio, do you operate storages alone, or they are also grouped into aggregators, and on which markets do they operate?
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. It really depends on who the customer is. So if they want to optimize that asset, and if it's a large front of the meter asset, it could be just at the site level, or it can sit in a wider portfolio if they've got a portfolio to put it in. We do aggregate smaller units up as well so they can access the market. In the UK, that's not as common as just optimizing a larger site by itself because of the metering requirements that we have and the technical requirements we have on aggregation. It makes it a little bit difficult to aggregate a large group of battery assets and put them into, say, an ancillary service. So the majority of the assets on our platform are front of the meter, like I said, and they would be optimized by themselves. And the markets they participate in, you can see them as kind of 4 markets. So there's the wholesale market, where you're obviously arbitraging either day ahead or intraday based on importing when power is cheap and exporting it when it's expensive, and you're getting that spread value. Historically, this hasn't been a very big market for batteries in the UK, but it's something that as volatility has increased, and it's sort of tripled it over the last few years, is becoming a lot more important and a bigger part of that business case for battery owners. You've then got ancillary services, which is where you're helping the TSO basically manage frequency at 50 hertz. In the past, that was around 90% of the revenues that customers were getting was from the ancillary service market, but we have reached a point in the UK where that market is saturated now because we have more storage on the system or more capacity on the system compared to what National Grid is procuring. So naturally, the prices have dropped significantly. Then the third market we have is the balancing market, which is the real-time market that National Grid uses to basically manage any energy constraint and also system constraint on the system. We call it the balancing mechanism. It's really great for flexible and dispatchable assets. So batteries are perfect to participate in the balancing mechanism. The only problem is it's quite difficult for National Grid to dispatch a battery in the balancing mechanism, because if they need to buy 200 or 300 megawatts in a certain region to dispatch a battery that's 5-10 megawatts, you'd have to dispatch lots and lots of batteries to make up the shortfall that you have in a region. And because of that, National Grid tend to dispatch larger plants instead, because it's easier to do rather than dispatching lots and lots of small assets. So although batteries are perfectly placed to participate in the market, they're not often called upon because of the systems that National Grid currently have, which are quite manual, and it's not easy to dispatch them. And we can come on to that later, but National Grid are changing that, and we're going to see big changes this year that will make it easier to dispatch batteries, so the balancing mechanism will become a more important revenue stream for batteries. Then the final market is the capacity market, and I think a few other countries as well in Europe have this, which is basically a market to ensure security of supply by paying the generators to be available if and when needed. In the past, this hasn't been a very big revenue stream at all for battery owners, because the way it works is that those kind of assets are heavily derated. So if the capacity market price was, say, £10 per kilowatt, a battery would only receive £2.50, so 25% of that £10, which is not a very large amount. Recently, the capacity market prices have significantly increased, and therefore batteries are getting sort of 10 times the amount of what they used to get. So it's becoming a more important revenue stream, but it is more kind of like the icing on top of the cake. If you get a good price, it's great. If you win a contract, it's great. But if not, it's not building the business case for batteries, if that makes sense. So I think you've got those 4: wholesale, ancillaries, balancing, and capacity market.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlotte. A question. You mentioned that there are still challenges in the current markets, regulatory and market-wise. But could you please elaborate a bit more on how the regulation and the market helped the widespread use of storages in the UK, in your opinion? How should we? What kind of development path would you recommend for Hungary? Thank you.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So in the UK, we've never subsidised battery storage. but the growth of battery storage has been significant or exponential, and we're kind of doubling year on year the battery storage capacity online. So something is going well, even though it's not the subsidy, which we don't necessarily need. So I think we can look at a few things. One of them is the fact that if you're now building a battery that's over 50 megawatts, you don't have to get the same kind of planning consent as what you used to have. So you used to have to go get a national infrastructure planning order, which would say you can build a 50 megawatt battery. Now you can keep that at the local community level. So it's much easier to build a bigger battery. The other thing that's happened is National Grid have allowed people to meter behind the boundary point. So that means if you've got a battery that's also got solar or a site load or something else happening on the site, you don't have to take that whole site into the balancing mechanism or into a market, and you can just take the asset at the asset level, which means your metering is much more accurate and you don't have to worry about what's going on somewhere else. So that's massively helped smaller assets enter the market. We've got something called the VLP route, which is where aggregators, so people that don't have supply licenses, can register as a virtual lead party, which then enables them to enter the balancing mechanism as well. So we're allowing non-suppliers, I guess is what you could call it, enter the balancing mechanism. We don't currently have that in place for the wholesale market, but there is something called P415, which is a regulatory code review that we're looking at to allow those aggregators to also access the wholesale market as well as the balancing mechanism. And then the final kind of thing that happened a few years ago was around ancillary services. Predominantly were sort of governed or dominated by diesel generators, and batteries found it quite difficult to participate. National Grid released a rule where they basically said, unless you are compliant with something called MCPD, which is a medium combustion plant directive order, you weren't allowed to participate in the market. And that basically then made the ancillary service market predominantly for battery storage. So there's a few kind of different levers that I guess have been pulled, or I guess that have happened, that have made the regulatory framework quite favourable for storage in the UK. Definitely not perfect, like we've still got a long way to go, but it's an attractive market and you can build a business case quite confidently just off the markets that we currently have, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Thank you, Siobhan. And Peter, if I may ask you, what challenges or opportunities can you see in the Hungarian regulatory or market setup that could help to increase the capacity of storages in Hungary?
Look, I think what I'm hearing from Charlotte is that the UK market has, and the market structure for flexibility is much more complex, or has various routes or market routes compared to what we have in the Hungarian market design. Basically, most of the flexibility that the power system needs is procured on the capacity auctions of the TSO. For capacity as well as then for balancing energy. Here there are various durations: 16 hours, 24 hours of product durations, plus month ahead, week ahead, and day ahead auctions. So these are this is the standard segment where. These are the standard segments, and this is where battery storage technology would need to compete with conventional incumbents, which are predominantly gas-fired generators, whether they are in CHP with a must-run obligation or just dispatched on a clean spark spread basis. But nevertheless, these are the incumbents that new entrants with a non-fossil leg would need to enter. As we have seen from the presentation of Pan, the prices have substantially increased on these market segments, especially AFRR. there's been an increasing demand, whereas supply didn't grow with that. So there were substantial price hikes and scarcity rents in times of shortage, which partially explains those prices, and that has attracted new entrants on a smaller scale. I think here, it's a sort of a interesting, battle between two technologies, because one has a limited duration, which was also mentioned by Pal, that battery technologies have to compete on a market for 16 or 12, 16 hours or 24 hours against conventional plants. So they need some sort of couple, a thermal couple, to be able to comply with that, or at least a thermal couple plus liquidity on the intraday power market to fill up if the battery is, the state of charge of the battery is depleted. So here, I think what we have started to see now as 1st of April is a change in the procurement structure of those capacity products on a day-ahead basis, that there will be hourly capacities procured by the TSO. I mean, this is where batteries or battery technology can substantially compete with conventional generators. So that can create the demand for shorter, I mean, 1 or 2 hour duration battery technology where they can outcompete conventional generators.
Thank you, Peter, for your thoughts. I'm sorry for interrupting. Just one note for the audience: if you have questions, please raise them in the chat box, and then I can deliver it to Charlotte and Peter. Thank you. And going and looking at into the future, I would like to ask your opinion. Charlotte, you already mentioned that storage systems haven't received any subsidies before. But then, if I may ask, like, what could be the reason that still storages became economically viable? So which are those segments that you would mention? Thank you.
Sorry, so I think were you asking, do we need subsidies in the UK, and if not, why do we maybe think that we don't need it? Sorry, was that the question?
Yeah, and how is that so many storage capacities has so on which market do they gain their revenues basically?
Yeah. So and this has changed recently. So in the past, the majority of assets would get their revenue from frequency response contracts, and actually the way it worked is that you'd have like a 2-year contract with National Grid, like a bilateral contract, at a very high price. So to build the business case for storage, it was quite attractive because you had a 2-year contract, and when that was up, you get another 2-year contract, and everyone was very happy. National Grid then moved towards seasonal contracts, so sort of like 6-month contracts, and then we went to month ahead contracts, then we went to week ahead contracts, then we went to day ahead contracts. So for an investor, that was not necessarily the easiest change. It was quite challenging going from revenue certainty to sort of, am I going to get a contract this day? Am I going to get a contract tomorrow? Am I going to get a contract the day after? For software platforms, it was great because it allowed you to then optimize between different markets quite frequently, and you'd run multiple day optimizations between either the wholesale market and the ancillary service market. And I think we're finally at a point now where we can prove, or we can show, that there's more value in other markets than there is in ancillary services. And I think that's what's kind of kept that investor confidence up in that as the ancillary service market became saturated and as the contracts became shorter and shorter and shorter, investors had somewhere else to go and make up that revenue, and if not, make actually more revenue, because the wholesale market, like the volatility or the spreads between the highest and the lowest price, has kind of tripled over the past few years. Now, granted, a lot of that is part of the environment that we're living in right now, and some of that volatility will be very short-lived, but we know that as we decommission more and more thermal assets on the system, and as we put more and more intermittent renewable generation onto the system, there's always going to be volatility, and it will still be there, albeit not as high as what it is today. It will still be higher than what it was in the past. So I think because of that, investors, particularly investors in the UK market, are still quite confident about the attractiveness of the UK market, and we see on a daily basis investors from other countries actually coming to us wanting to buy batteries in the UK, because it's a very hot market at the moment in terms of building the business case. I'd caveat that by just saying that that's predominantly large-scale assets. Domestic assets are not necessarily as attractive in terms of storage, and we can go on to that later about why it's maybe not the same. But I think where we are in the UK is that you don't need subsidies for a large asset because the business case is built, and the pipeline of storage in the UK is over 90 gigawatts at the moment, which is significant. And we're thinking that by 2050 we should have around or up to about 50 gigawatts of battery storage, which is a massive amount of flexibility on the system. So maybe a very biased response, but I think the UK market is very healthy when it comes to the investment case for storage. And that will probably come from, in the future, more and more merchant trading, like wholesale and balancing, compared to frequency response.
Very interesting. Thank you, Charlotte. And Peter, can I have your opinion about the subsidy scheme or the support scheme that we can face now in Hungary, or that is expected during the spring? Do you find it necessary, useful, or you think that maybe the market and regulation development could give a base for further investments in storage in the future?
Look, obviously, the reason battery storage hasn't picked up in Hungary because there wasn't certainty of revenues to be captured by battery storages. So therefore, if there's a subsidy scheme for revenues, plus to attract non-recourse financing also for these projects, plus there's as discussed, there's also a capex support scheme that definitely is going to attract investor attention to that. So if the goal is to build the substantial megawatt hours, hundreds of megawatt hours of battery storage technologies entering into the ancillary services or capacity market in Hungary, then this is going to reach its goal. So there will be investor appetite for that. Here, I was listening to these presentations of the UK market. I think here what is compelling to look at, every time I follow the evolution of the British or UK energy market, is the predictability and the dialogue of participants and about how they intend to cooperate around the future, whether this is retirement of existing assets or decarbonizing the energy system, and how that transition is going to evolve. That's a dialogue. I used to work in 2011 in the UK, and and that dialogue has already started back then about this, scale of renewable generation in the conventional asset base. I don't see this dialogue in Hungary. What I see is policy targets of, I don't know, 12 gigawatts of solar PV by 2030, and without any any systemic thinking of how much flexibility is going to be required in a system where we have maybe 7-8 gigawatts of peak load and 12 gigawatts of PV in the summer. So that dialogue did not happen, and now we want to change everything all at once, and we want to construct at the same time 3 500 megawatt CCGTs and 400 megawatts, 800 megawatt hours of battery electricity storage. I see here the risk of conflicting priorities if all done at the same time, plus the risk of substantial stranded assets. So this dialogue did not happen. And once there is a dialogue of how things, in what order or in what magnitude could take place, and this is in dialogue with the industry, then probably some of that risk aversion would go away anyhow. This is I think one element. Second element, this is compared to the UK market, this is a small pond, that's a large sea. So here we're talking about maybe a gigawatt of flexibility demand at the moment, compared to the 90 gigs of pipeline that was just mentioned by Charlotte minutes ago.
And
I think that that is, I mean, these subsidy schemes do attract predictability, for example, for storage operators, but whether they are going to grant predictability and price stability on the whole capacity market scheme, I'm not so certain of that. So I haven't seen the analysis, or no one was able to convince me.
Thank you. I think these are.
Was I able to convince myself of that?
Yeah, these are very strong messages, and thank you for those. Thank you. In the meantime, we received a question by Agnes Horvath to Charlotte, if I may raise, because I think it still belongs to the how things developed in the UK. So the question is that the UK storage market is very healthy now, but were there any hiccups in the beginning, and how bumpy was the road? That's the question.
Yeah, very, very good question. It was bumpy in the sense that the majority of the revenues, asset owners were reliant on ancillary services, and it was bumpy in that as an industry we had to work very closely with National Grid as new ancillary services were developed. So I don't know how familiar people are with ancillary services, but you essentially get like a droop curve which tells you what response you should do based on what the frequency is. And National Grid asked for certain levels of metering, certain levels of accuracy that not all providers could do, certain levels of aggregation. So we went from being able to aggregate at a national level, which was great because you could aggregate anywhere in the country. So if you only had 5 assets and they were split Scotland, south of England, east of England, it didn't matter because you could aggregate it and still participate in the market, to suddenly being only able to aggregate right down to a GSP, so a grid supply point, which is very, very locational. There's over 300 of them in the UK. So very specific. We had to work as an industry to kind of come up with a compromise and get it back to a level where it might not be national, but it's not GSP. And what we settled on was a grid supply point group, which is essentially, there's 14 of them in the UK. So they're much larger areas than that, the 300 plus GSPs. So that was bumpy because there was a time where there was a period in the market where essentially a lot of providers that were aggregating nationally were cut out of the market because they couldn't aggregate to that GSP, and then we had to lift it back up and make it a GSP group. So there have been challenges, and we've had to work with Grid on those challenges. Likewise, with something we have called performance monitoring and operational metering, where you have to send to National Grid 20 hertz readings, so that's 20 readings a second of what you're doing, and it's a lot of data. And there were debates or discussions around how long we have to store that data for, how we send it to National Grid. So conversations around that were challenging. I definitely don't think they would be all and end all, but the journey in the UK has very much been one of working collaboratively with National Grid, rather than National Grid just setting rules or setting consultations and then not listening to the industry. So we've always worked closely with the system operator on how the ancillary services should evolve. And likewise, that's happening with the balancing mechanism reforms as well. So at the moment, they're doing workshops with industry, with customers, to understand how they can reform the balancing mechanism so that they can dispatch more smaller assets. Because I think, like I talked about before, the way they dispatch smaller assets at the moment is very, very manual, and they've got to click about 6 different buttons to dispatch one asset. So that's fine if you're dispatching one big coal power station or a gas station, but if you're having to dispatch 50 batteries at the same time and you've got 6 buttons, that's a lot to do in a second or however long they've got. So naturally they don't do it, and they'll skip over a cheaper resource and they'll go to a more expensive one because it's easier to do. And that's challenging because we've got lots and lots of batteries ready and available to participate, but they're being skipped over. And in the UK, we call that the skip rate. And that's something that's been really has been very topical, because we need to reduce that skip rate and make sure that we're dispatching assets in the merit order. So again, something that was raised by the industry to National Grid, they now report the skip rate, and they now have an open dialogue with customers on how they can actually reduce that skip rate and dispatch those smaller assets. So we've definitely had our challenges, but we've also, I think, had a very good open communication or dialogue with the system operator on what those challenges look like. And I guess to give you a bit of context of where we are at the moment, the biggest kind of thing that's happening in the UK market, I know people talked about this earlier, is REMA, so the review of the electricity market, and looking at how we can reform our markets going forward. And again, that's been done in a way where there's a massive industry consultation and everyone is invited to respond. There's workshops, there's meetings, and people can obviously put forward their views for each of the different scenarios and each of the different options.
Thank you.
I don't know how that compares to Hungary.
We're at the beginning of this journey, this is not, so similar dialogues didn't happen yet, and much of the thinking or innovation is done in island modes, whether this is the TSO, whether this is the balancing system providers trying to aggregate, add in more capacity, either new front of the meter capacity or behind the meter capacity. This is all done in-house in islands, in the platforms that those balancing service providers operate. And there's more and more. When I think of it, when I mention innovation here, then there's I wouldn't compare it to the same degree of software platforms that you are operating, but nevertheless, that journey towards digitalization to enable more monetization paths of the same flexibility on an incremental basis, on more smaller increments and larger frequencies, that has started to happen. So I've mentioned that we have a battery storage project, a pilot project, which is only 4 megawatt, 8 megawatt hours. But what most, I mean, this is the, this is what everybody sees. What nobody sees is that we, at the same time, when we did this pilot, we also started to invest into as a conventional power plant operator. We have started to invest and develop our own aggregation platform, which is packed with business intelligence or automated business intelligence, so that whatever capacity will be plugged onto our platform can be, we always find the optimum, and it's not the TSO that has to find the optimum, and those assets will not be skipped.
Thank you. Thank you. If I may go back to before you mentioned, Peter, that the lack of communication is the biggest challenge right now in thinking over to the next generation of transmission in the electricity system. May I ask Charlotte if you remember how did this evolved in the UK? So Peter mentioned that in 2011 there were already discussion between the different parties and so on. But do you remember before if there were any challenges regarding the lack of communication and discussion in the UK, in the parties in the UK, and how they, and if there were any, then how they managed to resolve this lack of communication, and so thinking together and how to go through the energy transition.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think Nina touched on this earlier actually. So the distribution system operator is procuring local flexibility, and then the ESO is also balancing the system at a national level. So there is, between the two of them, you could be doing one thing for the ESO, but you could also actually be going against what the distribution system operator wants, because you're responding to one signal and you're not taking into account what the DSO does, and they can be conflicting. So I think, and Nina talked about this a bit, is that the way forward, and what we've kind of come to with that, is having a kind of future system operator and having that communication between the ESO and also the DSO on what's happening on the distribution level as well as at the transmission level, which I think is where we've had a challenge in the past. We've also had challenges around the distribution system operator offering. We've got 14 distribution system operators in the UK, and they all offer, or at one point they all offered, a flex product that was not standardized. So they'd have 3 or 4 products per region or per the 14 regions, and they would have very similar characteristics, but they'd be dispatched in different ways, and they'd have different response times, and they'd also be called different names, which is obviously very confusing for a customer. So we have done a piece of work to try and standardize those distribution products. So I would definitely say we've had challenges. There has been times where it hasn't been easy, and we've not had the communication with the DSOs, but I think we are at a stage now where we've got that, and there are lots of stakeholder meetings or stakeholder engagement meetings that people ask for in the industry. So I think it's really about industry working with the TSO or the DSO and asking for stakeholder workshops or meetings that have really helped, and consultations as well. Having the ability to respond to consultations is really powerful, because that's the industry's chance to put forward their views when it comes to a grid code change or any kind of grid code modification.
Thank you. Thank you. So there is a possibility to solve this issue, or there is an example that we can see. Time is running, so I would go and turn towards the future.
and ask you to how you think the energy storage, the role of energy storage will change in the future by 2050, and what kind of technologies do you expect to become widespread in the future, and what should be the role of those technologies? Yeah, Charlotte, if you can start, thank you.
Yeah, but a very big crystal ball question, I think.
Yeah.
But so I think one thing is the markets will, the revenue streams for storage will become more merchant, and I think I've said this a million times already today, but ancillary services are saturated, so merchant trading will become more important. And it's not just about that merchant trading, but it's also about having the ability to be in the right market at the right time. So knowing when you should be doing wholesale versus the balancing mechanism versus ancillary services or a reserve service. So that kind of cross optimization between the markets for storage is going to be, I think, really important in the future for where they get their revenues from. The other thing that we've not really talked about at all is the aspect of long duration storage. So we're obviously decommissioning thermal power plants, and we're trying to replace them with intermittent generation, and then 1 hour, maybe 2 hour, in some cases, flexibility. And we need flexibility that's much longer than 1 and 2 hours. We obviously need clean baseload or long duration storage, clean dispatchable storage that we don't have at the moment, that can operate for much more than kind of 4 to 8 hours. And I think that's going to be a key area to make the energy transition sustainable. Otherwise, we'll obviously have to keep assets like gas peakers online, or gas assets online to plug that gap or fill that gap. And I don't think we're at a point yet where the market has settled on what long duration storage should look like, or what technology should be put forward, and also what subsidy it's going to need, because I think it's quite clear at the moment that the markets that are available are not giving the signal for those assets to come online. So there clearly has to be some sort of subsidy that would work. So I think that's going to be like a huge focus, and it should be a huge focus to get us to the energy transition and get us to net zero. But for the UK, we're talking 2035, but definitely as well by 2050 being able to have a net zero system. So I would say merchant trading and then long duration storage is going to be a huge area of focus.
Thank you, Charlotte. And Peter, I know it's also a complicated question, because so we assume that communication between the different market players and the regulator starts. What's your opinion? You also mentioned that we expect that around 1,000 or 1,500 megawatts of gas-firing power plants will be built in the future. So in this more command and control regime, but still, what do you expect? What will be the role of storage in the future in Hungary? It's very complicated and broad question, but still, if you have any thoughts on this.
I think 2 hour duration storage will find its place in the ancillary service market, as well as so capacity revenue schemes, as well as energy dispatch, plus the combination combined with existing thermal. So there are various use cases. So one is just the 2 hour, 1 hour intraday capacities, or 1 or 2 hour capacities. There's also the opportunity to combine them with thermal units, gas engines, particularly to displace their mass run obligation, support their ramp rates, add peak capacity. So there's that path for them to play a role. And of course wholesale markets, as we see more and more volatility. So I certainly expect more and more market share of energy storage in the TSO balancing markets. And once that picks up, if it's supported with a policy contract, then the rate is going to be even higher than what merchant dynamics would dictate. And I also expect the same dynamics going forward, that sooner or later there's going to be a saturation, and it's going to be a red ocean, and then the natural next step is wholesale markets. And it was mentioned, I think, in the earlier part of today, that we are importing part of our daily balancing through interconnectors, and there's a limit to that. So wholesale to the capacity of the interconnectors itself is going to be the limit. So here there's going to be so the next frontier would be beyond short duration balancing, would be wholesale market balancing, and how we can balance 4 or 6 hours of durations, whether this is surplus or a deficit on the power system. So here, long duration storage competing with peakers, most likely, will be the next frontier. Long duration, I mean 4 to 8 hours, with probably new technologies, which I'm curious to see the first demonstrator plants or the first utility scale plants in the UK, so that we can copycat them here as well.
Thank you. Thank you. At this point, I would like to encourage the audience, if you have any questions, then please raise them. Until the questions arrives, I would like to ask one more question, and because up until this point, I think the main focus was on utility scale, grid connected storages, but could you share your thoughts about the domestic storage projects? Like what are the obstacles hampering the uptake of these projects in the UK? Charlotte, if you have any thoughts, then thank you.
Yeah, domestic storage is an interesting one. So in the UK, I don't think domestic storage has really taken off. It's definitely not taken off like front of the meter storage. And compared to other countries in Europe, like Germany, domestic storage in the UK is a lot more immature. I think there are a few reasons for this, and one of them, the ancillary services that we currently have are very, very fast responding, and you've got to provide these 20 Hertz accurate meter readings, and also operational metering in real time, which is one reading a second, but sent direct to National Grid's control room. So those kind of strict technical requirements are quite difficult for often the inverters of smaller assets that don't respond in the same way as a larger asset does. So I think it's the technical requirements that make it quite difficult for those domestic assets to participate in ancillary services. You've got the aggregation side of it as well, which I think there's not enough domestic storage UK in the right geographies to aggregate them up into a GSP group to even bid them into ancillary services. So that leaves you with the wholesale market or the balancing market. Now the balancing market, you also need that real-time metering piece, so that's going to be the barrier for domestic storage in the balancing. So the wholesale bit is the only bit left, and really to access the wholesale market in the UK, you obviously need your supplier to do it. Because aggregators can't access the wholesale market. So you can't have an aggregator come in and group them all up and bid them into the market. You need your supplier to do it. And your supplier is only going to do it if they've got enough domestic storage to make it worth their time to bid into the market. Because if you've got a few 5 kilowatt batteries, suppliers don't have the same appetite to optimize that and bid it into the wholesale market. So I think in the UK, those are the kind of 3 key reasons to why we've not really seen it take off. Electric vehicles are slightly different though, because I think people buy an electric vehicle not to make money from ancillary services or the wholesale market. So optimizing electric vehicles is great because people have bought the EV for another purpose, and then a secondary benefit is being able to make some money from your EV, which might be charging up when the day ahead price is low, or charging up in the balancing mechanism when the price is low, or being paid to charge up, for example, as well, is what we also see in the UK. So I think EVs, heat pumps, they'll be okay, but domestic storage at the moment in the UK is struggling. And I think until there's enough of it that it's attractive enough for for suppliers to participate in the wholesale market, it's quite challenging. And I don't know how that compares actually to Budapest, to be honest.
Domestic customers are a monopoly of one wholesale or one retail supplier, and whether this monopoly is a burden or a curse, it depends on the wholesale market environment plus so the price environment. Let's put it this way. So reaching those customers is given those domestic customers, given the monopoly of one single supplier, is a very cumbersome way. And I don't see a large potential, to be honest, on that front anytime soon. So if domestic storage is going to play a role, then it's going to be driven by more, in an island mode that you cannot put any more, you cannot increase the energy efficiency rating of your home without a rooftop installation, and you would have to combine it with a domestic storage unit to be able to harness it, because you cannot charge it to the grid. So that's where you're penalized to charge to the grid. So this is, I think, the motivation that will drive those installations, but they will not, they will not most likely not meet any organized market. Nonetheless, they will, they will change the load profiles to a more formidable shape for any retail provider, because the rooftop solar is not going to go against the grid. So this is what I see in domestic. But this is, I'm quite pessimistic here on Hungarian domestic storage. Where I'm a bit more optimistic is the industrial players and how they can combine. This is not 5 kilowatts. This is more the 100 kilowatt scale, where there's competition for supply. So there's various retailers providing services, energy supply plus energy services to those customers. And there could be various use cases for a battery on site, whether this is also a combination of the same industrial rooftop installation plus the operator's inability to access the grid and so on. So and then this could enable, there will be capacities which could be marketed, which are at scale, and I would also expect energy retailers to look at it as an opportunity to retain customers with added services beyond just energy supply.
Thank you. And we got previously a question, but I think it's really relevant in when we compare the UK and the Hungarian energy mix, the future energy mix, is that what is the difference in the energy storage need depending on the energy mix? So whether it's a wind and solar, or only solar solutions that are dominating the mix. So
I think it's from one point it's very technical question, but on the other hand, I think it's like where should we focus at, and what kind of storage solutions we should think about in the different markets and in the different regions. I think it could be relevant. I don't know if Charlotte, you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think just quickly, yeah, there definitely has to be a certain level of renewable penetration for flexibility to be required. And in the UK, we've definitely reached that. So I think around sort of 40 to 45% of our generation mix is renewable. And that's enough to require short-term flexibility. The need for longer term flexibility or some kind of clean dispatchable baseload is, I think, the next stage of the transition that we're getting to at the moment. But I agree that there has to be a level of intermittent generation for flexibility to be required, or congestion on the network, and that could just be a system where you've got congestion where there's lots of electric vehicles or heat pumps pulling from the system, and therefore you might need flexibility of those assets to try and alleviate that constraint, which is a slightly different need for flexibility, but one I think that will become more important or more significant as we electrify heat and transport.
Thank you. And the last question to Peter, as we can see in the energy strategies for Hungary, that they are planning to build the generation mix mostly on solar. So do you think that it has an impact on what kind of storage solutions we should focus on? So on a more day-to-day basis, or a shorter term storages, or should we also focus on a long duration or long term storage solutions as well?
Well, if you're serious about 12 gigawatts, then there's no other way than long duration storage. Simply, I'm just looking at the screen right now. We are at 4 gigawatts of PV penetration in Hungary right now. We have had already downward regulation of 600 megawatt at 9 o'clock this morning, when we were exporting already 200 megawatts. So that also suggests that during springtime, when right now you can see that my face is so dark because outside it's so sunny that the shade is way too shiny in the background. But when we are going to have surplus, what do we do with that surplus? And I'm concerned that you know, at 12 gigawatts of solar PV penetration, we are going to have substantial surpluses in the non-heating season, and power to anything will be the name of the game, or long duration storage.
Okay, thank you so much for answering these questions, Charlotte and Peter. Thank you very much for your participation. The time is up, so we should move on with the next panel. So Charlotte, Peter, thank you very much for your
it was a pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you. And with this, I would like to give the floor to Zsuzsanna Patu, who will be the moderator of the next discussion. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Let's see if we have all the panelists online. Yes, we do. Can you hear me?
Hello. Yep.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Hi. Good. So, welcome to the second panel This panel is going to be on demand side flexibility. I am Zsuzsanna Pató from REP, which stands for Regulatory Assistance Projects, and I'll be chairing this panel today. First of all, I would like to introduce you, our guests. First, Sarah Key Bright from the National Grid ESO. The National Grid ESO, as you know, is the electricity system operator for Great Britain. Her main focus is on long-term planning and appropriate wholesale market design that can deliver net zero power system at least cost. The second guest of today's panel is Alex Howard from UK Power Network, from the DSO market platform section of the company. Alex deals with the procurement of flexibility services within the UK Power Network, which is an electricity distribution network for London and southeast of England. So he is from a DSO. The next one is David Mills, who is from a technology firm, the EA Technology, the Net Zero Transition Team Lead. The company is dealing with identifying opportunities and methods to deal with the technical and commercial constraints associated with delivering net zero transition. They do innovation analysis and strategic advice to aid network companies and system operators. So they are giving advice to DSOs and TSOs. Last but not least, Gábor Szörényi. Gábor Szörényi was the director of the Hungarian Energy Office, the Hungarian regulator for electricity and gas, and now water as well. He was involved in setting up the Hungarian electricity market as we know now. He also has been the Secretary General of ERA, the Energy Regulators Regional Association. And most recently, he is advising the regulator on how to implement the regulatory issues contained in the clean energy package of the EU. Just a few house rules. This GoToMeeting platform doesn't have an inbuilt raise hand function. So if you want to intervene, just intervene or just raise your real hand. For the audience, I mean, you can submit questions as before to the panelists throughout discussion. So I would encourage you not to leave at the very end, but do it throughout the session in the questions or GoToMeeting. And either we will save some time at the end of the session, or if I see some questions related to the actual discussion, then I will just bring in some of those questions. For start, I prepared some warm-up questions based on the trailer of this panel. The trailer of this panel stated three things. First, high prices will trigger demand-side response. That's the first, so prices. The second, the EU emergency regulation prescribes a mandatory 5% peak reduction, and the assumption is that it will boost demand-side flexibility capacities in the EU. This is not a UK issue. And the third one is that the renewable-based power system, which is the target in most of the EU countries, will require high level of flexibility. So are these, in your opinion, valid statements? And in general, do you think the market will deliver what it needs to deliver in terms of demand-side flexibility? Or there is a need for government intervention to mobilize these resources? And feel free to pick any of the questions or any of the statements, or you can answer all. It's up to you. So, Gábor.
So I would like to show you the Hungarian situation, and then you better reflect on our programs. That in Hungary, the commodity prices were really very high at the end of the last year on all markets, and especially on the extremely high on the ancillary service markets. To understand the reasons behind the high balancing prices, you should consider some of the following circumstances. That the solar PV capacity reached more than 4,000 megawatt. Today has 4,260 megawatt, which represent 24% of the total Hungarian installed capacity, which is 11,000 megawatt. In 2022, 800 megawatt new PV capacity connected to the system. And this system has only 7,000 megawatt peak demand last year. And when you add the solar to the wind, installed capacity represent 36% of the system installed capacity as an weather dependent capacity. This relative high intermittent capacity require nowadays 700-800 megawatt EFRR capacity. This fast PV penetration resulted in scarcity of the flexibility in Hungary. There is not enough flexibility offer, and this flexibility market is very concentrated. We have a special mechanism on the significant market power, and the concentration reached this level in several markets several times. This situation resulted very high capacity prices on the reserve market, and especially on the EFRR market. Last year it reached 100 euro per megawatt hour capacity market, and the total cost of balancing doubled in the last year. The lack of flexibility sources resulted long queue for PV investors. Today, practically you cannot connect. You cannot have a permit from the network companies to connect new PV. And additional to this high ancillary service prices, we had roughly 50 euro per megawatt hour spread above the German prices, which resulted 400 euro per megawatt hour commodity prices on the day-ahead market in November. So these high prices, of course, started to force the different players, the industrial end users started to discuss with the TSO and with the potential aggregators. These aggregators are not independent aggregators, but mostly those former aggregators who has gas-fired units in the portfolio as well. The Ministry of Energy and the Hungarian regulator started to identify and reduce the entry barriers. They started consultation, and they will introduce new type of support scheme as well. But to identify the potential entry barriers is not easy, and they are in the middle of this elimination of these barriers. The TSO step by step introducing new products, but sometimes they call it technology neutrality, which means they would like to keep the former rules which fitted to the former gas-fired units. The DSOs are also working on the establishment of flexibility platform, but they are behind the TSO, and it's not clear for the players that in which year they will have a new flexibility platform. So this is the situation which triggered the flexibility to come online, but not enough to really interact. Thank you.
David?
So just thanks for that, Gabriel. Just to explain some of the work we've been doing. So here at Technology, working with some of the distribution networks in the UK and overseas, we've been running leading some flexibility trials. And when you talk about high prices, that's shown a couple of interesting aspects. A lot of more potential parties interested in being involved. but from the distribution network, who's looking at this from a system security and network investment viewpoint, they're needing long-term security on whether this flexibility is available. And then as we've been running these trials and we see high price volatility, we've had some of the parties having to pull out of the trials because they just can't, the contracts they entered into no longer stack up, and the contract arrangements for flexibility services that have been trialed have all had actually breakout clauses if it doesn't work. So I think it needs to be a big shift, and part of the signal here in terms of developing a DSO platform flexibility, making sure that it's capable of doing shorter term, near term procurement cycles to getting those providers on board, but also having enough market liquidity so networks have confidence that their flexibility is there when they need it and not before their transformers are overloaded or other challenges in assets in that space.
Maybe I can come in next if that's okay. So my name's Alex. I work for UK Power Networks, the DSO. So I think it's true that kind of high prices and particularly high price volatility drives DSF. I think that relationship can be quite slow, and I think it's different for different technologies. So I think we've seen over the last few years in the UK that high ancillary service prices, particularly around frequency management, have driven massive pipelines of electricity storage, mostly in front of the meter, and lots of that storage connecting to the distribution network. But we've not seen the same thing happen behind the meter, so kind of with industrial and commercial customers, with households, with the exception of EV take-up, which for distribution networks, I guess, is a double-edged sword of it is creating challenges to accommodate all that additional demand, but also is a valuable source of flexibility for us. I think, so David mentioned innovation. I think within the UK, that has been helpful at kind of generating interest through providers that perhaps would have been intimidated by the kind of complexity of existing markets and the uncertainty of returns around them. Where we are at the moment, I think, particularly around kind of DSO markets, is trying to kind of capitalize on that interest and kind of bring it under a kind of more market-based, more kind of business as usual footing, so that actually providers do have some more long-term confidence that it makes sense to kind of perhaps reorient their business models or perhaps invest in some integration to a new system, because these opportunities will be here to stay. Maybe I'll stop there.
So that leaves me from the electricity system operator. So from our perspective, you've set out 3 questions there. So I'll take the first one. High prices. I agree with Alex. It's particularly with volatility, it's going to potentially drive more DSF. But this is only if the price signals actually get through to the providers, and that is really the difficulty. I would say that looking at the past trend of the high prices and sustained high prices, they're the perfect signal for permanent demand reduction. As long as you've got the policy in place again, because there's so many market barriers, and to invest in solutions, you need access to low-cost financing. But when it comes to sort of demand side flexibility, it's about those price signals getting through to the consumers, and those price signals go via the suppliers. So you have you've got to consider how suppliers are incentivized, and we have a situation in the moment we're waiting for retail market reforms, and there has been some disruption in the retail market sector, and there's been a price cap imposed and so on. So, you know, extraordinary times. We also have a situation where a lot of costs are being passed through to consumers and ending up as levies on the bill, and that, you know, changes the price signal. So, for example, we have rising costs in the UK in terms of running the system. I should emphasize. So we have rising congestion costs and system operation costs that we've been trying to get a handle on. They've been rising, and they're predicted to continue to rise. So ESO has taken quite a lot of actions to reduce these. And among those actions is to try to tap into the available demand side flexibility in ways to, you know, to intervene to make sure the price signals get through to consumers. Ideally, this should go through the market, but we have various blockers in place that we are trying to tackle, and so that is why, you know, this winter, given the urgency of the situation, the demand flexibility service was launched, and that was sort of, you know, trying to give for the very small providers that are not able to participate in the balancing mechanism yet, to give them access and to try to unlock their flexibility. So it's a direct intervention. Another one is the local constraint market initiative as well, which is trying to help reduce constraint costs and provide competition against those in the balancing market, the resources in the balancing market. So another sort of intervention there. But so this is what it really boils down to, is those price signals and getting them through to consumers. And that's quite complicated. So I've sort of covered quite a few things there, including you know, levies that end up, and they're usually applied in a kind of in a flat volumetric way. So, you know, ultimately, as the share of fixed charges, you know, grow in the bill, and they're applied in this way to recover policy costs, you know, that dampens the demand side flexibility signal. Also, we have incoherence between energy vectors. So, you know, there's a lot more going through the electricity, a lot more policy costs going through the electricity charges than through gas, and that doesn't help the investment case for things like heat pumps. And you know, that share of levies is growing. So, you know, there's a lot of feedback loops as well, makes it much more complicated. I mean, the lack of flexibility doesn't help at all with the phenomenon of price cannibalization. You know, it would really help with that if we had a lot more flexibility. And so with that situation, because of the way that the renewable support schemes are designed, those levies grow. And the situation gets worse. So so there's a lot to manage. And jumping straight to your third question, really, because the other one was more EU orientated. But that third question on, you know, just how important demand side flexibility is, it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical in relation to driving down costs, but it's also critical in relation to system security and to decarbonisation, because, you know, when you think about a system where the share of renewables is growing and will be extremely large, you know, predominantly weather-based, weather-dependent renewables, a system based on this, then it's absolutely critical that, you know, this available supply is consumed when it's available, and you therefore need to coordinate the potentially variable demand with the variable supply, and so this comes with the demand side flexibility and storage. And the way to do that efficiently is to do it through price signals, to coordinate supply and demand. And when we are considering the challenges that we face as a system operator, And you've probably heard on this webinar quite a lot of that already. In current markets, you know, we're facing a lot of challenges. We're trying to fix these problems, but really looking to the longer term, when you have really, you know, a system dominated by renewables, the future challenges look really quite different, and the emerging issues that we're seeing right now will only get worse. So we're going to, you know, see, like I mentioned, the phenomenon of price cannibalization, but the supply-demand imbalances will become a lot more extreme in both directions when you have excess demand, or cases when you have excess generation. And that is really, you know, very different. It really changes the nature of security of supply, and requires different solutions, really. So this is very different. And the system stress situations that we foresee are going to be throughout the year. And you know, cost-effective solutions can come through more unlocking of demand-side flexibility. So, you know, it's also with decarbonisation, if you just put more renewables into the system and you're curtailing so much of it, that's not helping emissions reduction. So, and the less demand-side flexibility you have, and storage and interconnectors flowing in the right direction, the more you're going to have to rely on the much more expensive solutions for, you know, low carbon dispatchable capacity in the form of CCS and hydrogen, that still face a lot of uncertainty, a lot of innovation yet to happen to reduce those costs. So, you know, there's quite a lot of risk involved here, and uncertainty. So that makes it even more challenging. I'll stop there for a moment.
Well, okay, I don't think that it's a new thing for us Hungarians. There are lots of taxes and levies. And as you said, the problem with it is twofold. One is that they mute the price signals in power prices, and the other one that mostly they are on electricity, which is a huge barrier for electrification. And this is not a UK or a Hungarian phenomena. This is basically all across the EU. There are some countries who already recognize that and taking action, for example, Denmark. So that's a real issue, and the barrier. We've heard in the previous panel that the UK plans to have 30 gigawatt flexible demand. This is the forecast. My question, and it's basically to Gabor, I guess, that do we know how much flexibility we need in Hungary, what kind, and by what timeline? It's not me who is important, but do the market actors know what they can expect by 2030, 35, 40, and 50? We can't hear you.
Mystic one. Yeah, sorry, but I was unmuted by the organizers. Yeah, it's okay.
That's
so that I can give you an optimistic and pessimistic answer as well. But I will let you know both. That when the government would like to build 3 gas-fired flexible units just to solve the flexibility problem, to have why this decision exists, because the Hungarian TSO calculated that till 2030 we need additional 1,900 megawatt flexible capacity, which is a huge amount. And because in Hungary the network companies not really believe that the demand side flexibility is a well-functioning something, that's why they would like to build a capex. They would like to have a capex-based solution, new power plants, or at least storage. I don't know exactly whether this 1,900 megawatt is a realistic figure or not. In the previous panel, the head of the Dunamentei power plant, who has storage and gas-fired portfolio as well, mentioned that there is a lack of transparent discussion between the TSO and the market players. So nobody knows what type of analysis showed or resulted this additional 1,900 megawatt, and what are the needed capacity for the next 2-3 years. But the prediction was this huge amount. I am not sure this is enough for the investors to enter, to spend a lot of money on the demand side flexibility. Maybe we need more discussion and more transparency on this prediction.
Okay, let's move a little bit to the details. First, a very, very easy question. There are many accusations, especially in nascent markets, that demand flexibility or demand side resources in general, they are not reliable. Can you debunk this argument based on the UK experience, or did you have any problems with less reliability from the demand side as compared to generation?
That's to me.
Well, anyone?
You
know, whenever you feel like you have something to say, we just play by the ear.
So, so you, if I understood that right, you were talking about the level of firmness and reliability performance of DSR or DSF relative to generation, right?
Yes.
So I'm not, you know, I have colleagues in ESO in the teams that are working really closely with this, but as far as I understand, for example, with the demand flexibility service, there is an industry webinar happening today actually where they're sharing some insights, and in fact the learnings from that particular service will be published later in the year, so you'll be able to get those from the website. But as far as I understand, when the tests were done, you know, there was over delivery. You know, a lot of enthusiasm, I guess. But when you know, when it went live, you know, there were, I think, was more some under delivery, but more than 80% turned up. So as far as I know, so you know, there is. It's new, lots of learning, suppliers adjusting and learning as they go, and ESO working very closely with the providers and suppliers and industry as well. So so there'll be you know, lessons learned and then hopefully an improved service for next winter. But you know, in terms of actually getting response, it's fairly firm, and consider the fact that, you know, at the moment we're in a quite crude enabling conditions. We haven't got market half hourly settlement rolled out yet, you know, and so that's quite important, and the automation that is needed to deliver accurate you know, response, and then you know, the ideal situation is where you know, the aggregators can manage the assets, but that requires trust for you know, to hand over your asset, and you know, new service level agreements and all of these sorts of things. So it's, you know, it's the beginning of a journey. But I would say, you know, I'd be interested to see what David and Alex say about it, about the reception of it, or anything else in terms of performance.
Thanks, Sarah. Maybe I'll build on that. So the last time we ran a flexibility tender, about 80% of the response we accepted was from charge points. And as I mentioned earlier, kind of electric vehicle charge points are one of the big reasons that we're seeking flexibility in the first place as a DSO. We ran a project called Shift over the last 2 years, and we experimented with different ways of engaging demand side flexibility from EVs, from flexibility contracts, price signals, capacity based charges, And across those three, we actually got really good response. So around about kind of median 80 to 85% response during the kind of 6 to 9 p.m. time where we were looking to reduce demand. I think that the really interesting thing about DSF in terms of reliability is that it's much less binary than contracting and expecting a response from a big gas plant or even a big kind of grid scale battery. That more and more as this grows, we can rely on some of the statistics here and say that actually we know we're going to get a response. We might not know exactly to the kilowatt what it will be, but we can be more and more confident that there won't be huge systemic failures. There will be kind of small, some people who over deliver, as Sarah said, and some people who kind of slightly under deliver. That's a challenge for us at the kind of very low voltage part of our network, because there's not very many customers, not very much diversity to rely on. But the further you get up the network, the kind of bigger problems that you're trying to solve, I think DSF might look more reliable in the long term than some of those kind of big bets that we place today.
Thank you, Alex. It aligns with a lot of the trials that we've run. We've shown that electric vehicles and willingness for owners of electric vehicles to shift their charging behaviour is quite accommodating. It aligns with the procurement responses that UK again have seen. But a lot of the flexibility trials that we've seen, the response is very much technology dependent, and particularly the most recent projects we've been doing in Northern Ireland, which is an emerging market for flexibility. They're low barrier to entry, so a lot of manual steps in process to avoid having to require providers to develop automation schemes just to trial and get involved. And that flagged a lot of challenges around getting reliable responses. But as the market grows and those schemes come into place, you can see how that you can get reliable responses, particularly those which had already implemented automation schemes, and ideally those that are around battery storage had the greatest response. But some of the other customers that were just reducing demand, some industrial facilities, were good in a good response in some cases, but not always every time, depending on the kind of what activities that are going on in their own process plants. I think the key challenge down at particularly as you get into the lower voltage levels, is understanding where your potential services are, and that modelling and monitoring aspect is of growing importance, and we're seeing that across the DNOs in GB as part of their next regulatory period, and just to understand more what's actually happening at that level, what's connected there, and therefore potentially what services are emerging.
Well, I think I would like to keep the conversation on the use of demand-side flexibility for networks. I think we discussed quite a lot already before on the various revenue streams from various markets. So let's now stay a bit with the networks, as we have two panelists linked with networks. So my question would be, I mean, UK has probably the most developed flexibility platforms to deal with network congestion at the distribution level. Could you tell us a bit how do they operate? I mean, and also about incentives in grid ownership and operation, as we know in the UK is unbundled at the transmission level. That creates very, very clear incentive structure. But what are the incentives for DSOs to use demand side resources at all? So why would a DSO venture into a field which is like kind of unknown, kind of risky? So how does that work in the UK? Because not only in Hungary, but in the rest of EU, what I see is that DSOs are not really on board with those changes that the whole energy transition requires in the power sector. And my personal conviction is if the DSOs are not fully on board, nothing's going to happen, because they are going to be a key player, very, very much more important player than before. So this is about the flexibility platform and the incentives of the DSOs to have non-wire solutions instead of building new substations and grids.
Okay, if I come in on this first, and maybe if I start, Shusha, with the incentive part. So I think probably the key thing that has driven interest and now commitment from DSOs around flexibility has been the way that our regulatory price control works. So in particular, we have what we call a TOTEX regime, which basically means that we kind of try to treat capital expenditure and operational expenditure the same. So if we can save money on capital projects by spending operationally on flexibility, then that is a saving. And so the DNOs have been incentivized where they can deliver the same capability but cheaper using flexibility, that effectively they get to keep 50% of that saving. So 50% is passed back to customers and 50% sits with the DNOs. And that is has been quite a powerful incentive. I think there are two additional things that are starting to impact as well. So the first is Ofgem, our regulator, has introduced a specific DSO incentive. So this is a pot of money that DNOs can access if they perform well as DSOs, and a key part of that assessment is kind of how they use flexibility, how they develop those markets, what customers think about their role there. And there's an opportunity for DNOs to secure more money, but there is also an opportunity for us to be penalised. So for UK power networks, we can earn an additional £11 million a year through that DSO incentive, and we can be penalised up to £5.5 million. And that makes it one of our biggest incentives, where we can kind of win or lose during price control. And then the last piece on why are we doing this, I think, is around connections, and this has become kind of particularly acute challenge over the past 12 months, 2 years, that in order to connect people at the speed that they expect and at the speed that we want to, flexibility is a big part of how we do that quickly. So rather than waiting for the network to be expanded, we can get people connected, sometimes on a flexible connection, and increasingly use flexibility to make sure that they have access to the network when they need it. In terms of the kind of the platform, the products, how we engage the market, so we advertise our flexibility requirements months or years ahead of time using a platform called Pickload Flex, that has about 50% of UK DNOs are kind of signed up to that platform. We offer a range of flexibility products. So some of those offer greater certainty, greater commitment, and so they have things like availability fees. We expect flexibility providers to commit a certain level of capacity at a certain price, through to more flexible products where actually we have less commitment from providers, and we can use those kind of more on a kind of ad hoc pay-as-you-go basis. And we've seen kind of different technologies, different business models kind of gravitate to those different products differently. The last thing I'll say is that at the moment we run our flexibility kind of procurement kind of on a twice a year basis. So we look at our network, we kind of forecast ahead, we work out kind of what areas would we benefit from flexibility, and we go out and we ask the market for long-term commitments, typically against that. One of the big things we're focused on this year is how do we supplement that with a closer to real-time competition. So we allow greater participation from the demand side, who potentially can't commit their availability months ahead of time, but kind of on a day ahead basis might have a kind of much better idea of what their availability is and what the price is they'd be prepared to move at. It also gives us a better opportunity to coordinate with the work that National Grid ESO do, so Sarah's organisation, where increasingly we are sharing access to these same resources. So those resources can be used to solve our issues. They can also be used to solve national issues. And the more we can align the timings of those markets and the rules for those markets, the greater opportunity for DSF and flexibility in general to maximize its value to the system, rather than having to pick a particular use case that may or may not be the best thing for them to do.
I think I'm very happy that you mentioned the TOTEX approach. I think it's only in the UK and maybe in Ireland when there is this approach. The rest of Europe is still heavily biased for CapEx, and there's nothing to blame on the DSOs if they earn a better return on CapEx than investing in much more risky and unknown OpEx solutions. And it's also very important to emphasize that you have in the UK kind of performance-based regulation. When the network companies has preset objective, it can be anything related to the energy transition, it can be related to reliability, the number of smart meters deployed, whatever. And then the DSO has a direct financial incentive to reach those targets, because it can keep some of the revenues or it can be penalized. This is something always discussed in the EU context, but nothing happens ever. Also in the EU regulation, the Electricity Directive and the Electricity Regulation, there is reference to performance-based regulation, and in the current market reform, there will be a reference to deal with the CapEx bias, but we shall see what's going to happen in the EU member states. I have follow-up questions on the DSO-TSO cooperation. I mean, in physical terms, these are seamless networks. The reason why we have DSOs and TSOs is partly a historical reason. But in the future, you know, the DSO is going to be like TSOs. They will have to do more or less the same stuff as the TSOs has been doing historically. So what happens in the UK if I have considerable potential, flexibility potential? How can I sell it or offer it to the DSO or to the DSO or the TSO, or I just sell it somewhere and they agree who's going to use it? And sometimes, you know, in a certain location, there could be my adjustment of consumption can be beneficial at the local network, but can be not beneficial at the transmission level. So these kind of discrepancies, how does this work in reality in the UK, if it works? So that we can have an idea actually, you know, what's going on.
Sarah, do you want me to go first? Yeah, okay. So I would say that we are still early in our journey here on DSO, TSO coordination. So at the moment, those flexibility providers can sell both to the DSO directly and to the ESO, so the national system operator directly, which pushes complexity to them. So they have to decide kind of where am I going to participate? Are those rules compatible? How do I want to commit myself over time? so we get some quite sophisticated players who are able to kind of navigate that market well. They're able to kind of stack services, they're able to kind of move between markets as needs change. But there are also providers who I think it's fair to say find that that market structure quite intimidating and difficult, and kind of very fragmented. We have a long-standing collaboration across the DSOs and the ESO around what we call primacy, which is trying to establish some kind of technical rules around who has kind of first call on assets. I think the bit that we haven't resolved yet, and will hopefully kind of happen over the next few years, is around the kind of procurement of these things, and ensuring that actually kind of procurement decisions are coherent in a whole system sense. So I think we've made some good progress to make sure that actually we deal with some of these things in kind of operational timescales, and we don't do anything that kind of endangers parts of the network in order to serve another part of the network. But in terms of sharing more information across the ESO and DSO, I think we're still working that out. The other thing to say is that I think Ofgem, our regulator, is kind of really interested in this question too, and they're looking to kind of clarify some of the roles and responsibilities for the future and make sure that actually these two roles are complementary and they're not creating new barriers for flexibility.
Yeah, that was well explained, Alex. And I mean, there are examples of concrete examples of cooperation, and with, as Alex explained, there's also a lot of interesting innovation projects going on as well. And they're worth looking at. eTrader, for example, is one, but it's the name of one. But where they're looking at, how to the different options for coordinating, across DSOs and ESO, and through different solutions, including price optimization, if you like. But we're going through quite a big transition as the electricity system operator to become more independent, to become the future system operators, the word that's been commonly used phrase. So a lot of change with that, and of course, as may have been mentioned earlier in the webinar, the government has launched the review of electricity market arrangements. So some big questions on the table there in relation to market design, and interconnections with this topic. So it's very much, I suppose, in flux and developing at the moment.
Well, I'm happy to hear that not everything is solved in the UK yet. I have another question still on the networks. You don't need flexibility in general for network management, but you need flexibility at certain locations. So this is a very location-specific thing. And that requires transparency. We've heard in the previous presentation or panel that the UK DSOs, they operate this open network project, which is a collection of data sets that provides like visibility of network assets. So for example, me, if I want to build an electrolyzer or a fast EV charging station, I have some idea, what the availabilities are at the network at the various voltage level. This is a tool which has been used not only in the UK, but also in the US. And I think it's a really, really important tool. They call it hosting capacity maps there. So, you already have some experience with these tools and maps. So which information proved to be the most important for the various actors, and what kind of network users are actually looking into these data sets?
So you're right. So over the past few years, we've published a lot more data about the network through our open data portal. I think that it's fair to say that, again, it's the kind of sophisticated developers who are really able to kind of utilize that data and kind of look across kind of various distribution networks, combine that data with kind of other information that's going to inform where they site assets and make good decisions about where they want to connect. But this has definitely kind of helped the front end of that process to kind of give more visibility of where we're likely to have capacity. I think kind of one of the challenges is around kind of how you deal with pipelines of stuff to connect. So I think it's true at the distribution network, it's true at the transmission network that we have huge pipelines of renewable and storage assets that want to connect to the network, and not all of it can. We know that not all of those projects come to fruition, so kind of historically a lot of them drop away, maybe through planning, maybe kind of other project difficulties mean that they don't get built. But there is some ambiguity about like how we should treat those projects when we present back to customers. This is what the capacity on the network might look like over the next few years. I think one of the areas that we are often pushed by our customers is around kind of sharing more granular time series data about the use of our network. Sometimes it's to do their own kind of due diligence. So we may have given them a connection offer and said that we expect you to be able to connect at this date with this level of potential curtailment, and they want to ensure that they understand kind of where the risks are around that offer. And sometimes it's for kind of more innovative solutions that they have in mind, where actually that granular data can help them in a way that averages or kind of understanding peaks doesn't. I think the last thing I'll raise and then be quiet is around the kind of network model. So kind of how is the network connected, and that, believe it or not, is a big challenge to release a kind of accurate and complete data set that's kind of helpful for customers. So we have about 8 million homes and businesses connected to our network. We have about 120,000 substations that we manage, thousands and thousands of miles of cables. And so it's not straightforward to release that data in a way that it's useful for customers. But I think that is one of the big challenges we've got ahead, is particularly as local government and other actors try to put together kind of coherent plans for achieving net zero. How do we open up more of our data sets and probably kind of more tools to interpret those data sets than we ever have before?
We have a few questions coming. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to add a bit on Alex's comment there regarding network models. This is something that we've been working with, and it's various levels across different networks in the UK, where they have ability for customers to apply for connections at certain locations with the network model behind that, doing the analysis. And then on top of that, the ability to overlay things such as network capacity, trend in overlaying electric vehicle charging requirements in certain areas, so that the developers that might be installing these assets can be better informed on, and therefore reduce some of those delays that you might have through the connection process by spending time applying for a connection in a location which you know is going to be constrained, and you can find that out in advance. So it's definitely a growing set of modeling tools being developing, but a challenge, yeah, putting together all the network data behind that to map it out.
Well, in the meantime, I've been checking the questions, and there seems to be two going to the same direction, and I hope I interpret them properly. So the question is, are the flexibility prices fluctuating widely? So how big the spreads are, maybe from year on year? And how do you decide whether to procure flexibility or to invest into capacity expansion of the network? So what are the decision-making tools you have? And this is a question primarily to Alex. To decide whether you will actually do a traditional enforcement of the grid, or you do flexibility procurement with fluctuating prices, or the portfolio, the share of any of these two options. So how do you decide on the optimal portfolio? Knowing that you have a TOTEX approach, so basically you are indifferent to the solutions you're picking.
Okay, so maybe I can come in on that question first, and maybe someone else can pick up the volatility question. So we've had a process for quite a long time, and it's something that we are formalizing now, and something we'll publish the methodology over the next few weeks, actually. But essentially, we look across our network and we're forecasting, sometimes based on granular measurement data, sometimes not, how the capacity requirements for the network will change over time, and kind of we then identify sites where actually for a portion of the year they're likely to be outside their firm capacity. We then look at what's the cost of moving that typically substation to the next level of capacity, and we apply a cost benefit analysis, which is something that's been standardized across DNOs in GB, to look at what's the value of kind of moving that, let's say, £3 million investment in a new substation to 5 years in the time, 5 years kind of hence. And so there's a net present value benefit there of spending money later rather than earlier. And we also know, based on experience, that there's some optionality that we get here, actually, of kind of, if we use flexibility, we can decide not to invest in this part of the network because actually the need that we foresaw doesn't actually materialize. And that's happened quite a lot over the last few years, that we've spotted parts of our network where we thought we need to reinforce. We've purchased flexibility, and then the need has subsided, it's materialized much slower than we initially expected. So we have this kind of MPV benefit, so the net present value of moving investment into the future. That effectively sets the top price that we're prepared to pay for flexibility. So we then look at, okay, how many megawatts, how many kilowatts typically would we need to buy for how many hours? And so if there's a net present value of moving that investment of £100,000, we divide that £100,000 across the number of kilowatt hours that we're going to need. We then go out to market and say, can you provide flexibility at this location, at this price, with this guidance on when we're likely to use that flexibility? And if we secure enough flexibility, then brilliant, that's decision made. We go flex first. If we're not able to secure enough flexibility, it's possible that we can still defer that investment, maybe not by 5 years, but maybe by a year or two, and we can build up that flexibility over time, or we can see how that need materializes over time. There are some cases where either we spot the need late, or actually we just can't, despite repeated efforts in the flexibility market, we can't secure enough flexibility at the price that we're prepared to pay. And in those cases, we'll reinforce. I think over time, we're becoming more experienced about kind of what are reasonable expectations around flexibility prices. We're becoming more informed about what flexibility is connected to our network. But on both of those things, I would say there's quite a lot of learning by doing. So kind of it's a valuable process to get those flexibility requirements out to the market and to have as many people as possible try to provide a response against them.
Yeah, well.
May I have a question that you mentioned that this cost-benefit analysis is a standardized method. Is it important that the regulator accept this calculation? Are they involved in this standardization? Do they need to accept the result of this cost-benefit analysis, or it's just the DSO decision how to calculate which is cheaper?
So I think it's really important that the regulator is involved in that conversation. So not necessarily the conversation about every single site, but the methodology that we go through and the kind of transparency that we offer. So there has been a long-standing concern within the UK that despite the TOTEX incentive, DNOs as businesses are valued based on the extent of their asset base. And so one of the things that we have to work really hard on is to make sure that kind of stakeholders trust the way that these markets are working, and that we're not accidentally or purposefully biasing towards a capital solution. So one of the things that we've done quite recently is separate out the DSO department from the kind of traditional DNO. So we've set up a separate company. We are setting up an independent supervisory body who will oversee, in particular, those decisions about kind of where asset and where flexibility is the right solution.
Is it forced by the legal requirement, or just a decision of the DNO to be more transparent, demonstrate to the stakeholders that this is not a capex-based decision, but it's really the optimum?
So some of it is regulator-led. So we have a DSO incentive, part of which relates to transparency and part of which relates to kind of stakeholder attitudes to the DSO. So there is some money at stake. The regulator has stopped short of saying explicitly how DNOs need to deliver that transparency. So as things stand, we're the only DNO to have gone as far as we have. So creating that separate company, creating the kind of separate governance. I think partly our rationale has been, if we are proactive in delivering transparency, reduces the need for the regulator to step in and potentially prescribe solutions which are more difficult for us to implement. So if we can go beyond what is required by the regulation and demonstrate that that works for customers, it reduces the need for kind of Ofgem to step in and say all DNOs must do this, which potentially is looks like separating the DSO from the DNO in terms of ownership.
Thank you.
Well, we have like 6 more minutes, so I still had a few questions, and there are still a few questions in the chat, but I think I'll just close this session, and I would like to close the whole seminar. And well, instead of trying to summarize what has been discussed since 9 o'clock, I would like to provide you with some personal takeaways of all the discussions I had over the last few years on flexibility, including storage. And you will see whether these make sense or not, but I just want to keep to the key messages. So I think first, we all recognize that we need all sources of flexibility. So even though today was about storage and demand side flexibility, we do have other flexibility sources. So networks, internal and cross-border, they're also sources of flexibility. Fast and extended markets are also, part of flexibility sources, and generation can be also flexible. So if we want to keep the cost of this whole power system transformation, which we signed off to, if we want to keep the cost contained, we have to use all of them. So it's not an either-or question. The other thing is that storage and demand side resources, they are new kids on the block, and it has some consequences. The vintage power markets, what we have now, they have been designed for traditional generation technologies, and we all acknowledge that in the future, it should be a technology neutral, moreover, a technology inclusive. So all new entrants can have easy market access. And this means that we need to develop a true level playing field for demand and supply side options, because we have to equal power demand and supply at every single second. And you can do it both ways, either modifying the demand or modifying the supply. Basically, this is the idea behind the energy efficiency first, which is a big buzzword in the EU, and a lot of people wonder what that means. I think it means this. For networks, these are called the non-wire solution, and I think we discussed extensively in the last session. And DSOs this will not happen with the current mainstream regimes, remuneration regimes. And we heard that in the UK, this TOTEX approach seems to be working, although there is still some hesitation from stakeholders, though still some credibility and trust needs to be developed, even in the UK. I think we also can agree that demand side flexibility in the past, it was used for contingency, while sometimes it's still used for contingency. But it's much more than that. It's not only contingency and not only peak shaving, although this is the thing that is mostly discussed when we think about storage and demand side flexibility. These resources can deliver various services at various timescales, and in a net zero power system, we will need all these services. And the last thing, which we haven't discussed much because we didn't have the time, is that most probably will not be able to deliver net zero without the involvement of simple ordinary households. Like heat pumps and EVs are going to happen. They're going to be mainstream, and they are great flexibility resources. Of course, especially for heat pumps, it's only true if they are coupled with efficient building. If you have a leaking building, you might have a heat pump, but it's not going to deliver any flexibility. And it's very important that we design tariffs, prices, both energy and network tariffs for the consumers, so that whenever they minimize the bills, because that's their rationale, these choices will at the same time provide maximum net benefit to the power system as a whole. Someone said earlier that, you know, whatever we do has an impact on others as consumers, and this is really true. So even those consumers who are not involved in any flexibility, they will enjoy the benefit of demand-side flexibility, for example, by lower prices at peak times. So we all share the benefits from avoided infrastructure costs, no more grids or less new grids, less new generation plants, and we have to be cognizant that the more consumers are involved in this, and of course some of them will have greater potential and some of them will have a lower flexibility potential, but the more we can dig into this potential, the better for all of us. And it's also very important that we keep the equity dimension in mind. So it's very important not skimming the market, not skimming consumers, only those ones who has this potential, but make sure that those who are more disadvantaged can actually be active consumers in the future. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So the last few words, time to thank you. I would like to thank you, the British Embassy, for this initiative of discussing pressing energy policy issues. We label them energy security, but these are not only about energy security among British and Hungarian stakeholders. Very big thanks to the presenters and the panelists for joining us today and sharing their experience. So Viktor, Matt, Pál, Nina, Peter, Charlotte, Sarah, Alec, David, and Gabor. Big thanks for your time. And also thanks for the interest and participation and questions for all the audience. A few words I was asked to say on the follow-ups. So the presentations and the video recording will be made available at the website of the event. I think the presentation probably by Monday, the video probably in a week's time. REC will prepare a policy brief on both topics with the major lessons learned, so summary of the discussions of today. And lastly, REC and the British Embassy is planning to develop a platform linking British and Hungarian stakeholders to continue the exchange we started today and in the previous webinar. Some of the questions haven't been asked, so we will try to make sure that we find someone suitable to answer them. If you have further questions, please send it to the organizers and we will try to come back to you. I think that all has been said. Thanks very much. Have a nice day and have a nice lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye. I enjoyed it.
Bye.